Hey everyone, and welcome to Picture This, a show where this is our best pictured, if you will. I am here, I'm Dylan, your co-host. I'm here, as always, with Chadwick Webb, co-host of the show, Picture This. Chad, welcome to 1962. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Yeah, this was a really interesting slate, very long slate, not in quantity of films, but
Yeah.
just runtime.
Yeah.
It feels
I
like each of them were just really, really long to
yeah.
get through. But I will say, I think it's like a fantastic slate, except for maybe one.
Ooh, okay. We'll have to find out what
Yeah.
that one is. But yeah, it was one of those things where I was looking at them. I was like, oh, it's a 5 film slate, no problem. I'll start it the week of Thanksgiving because I had to prep some other shows, and then it snuck up on me. I was like, oh, these are all 3 hours long, and the shortest one is over 2 hours. So it was
Yeah.
definitely a daunting task, but we couldn't do this alone because, as we always like to do, especially for our year of classics, as we come to an end, as we are approaching the final month of the year of classics, we still have one penultimate episode to go for that. And we have been getting a guest on for every year of classics to just talk about these films that have just been so ingrained in pop culture, and some that have been maybe some diamonds in the rough waiting to be reappraised and ready to be highlighted in their own right. And we have a great guest today, a friend of Chad's that became a recent friend of mine. And we are very excited to hear his expertise here on the channel. It is Charles Mullin. How's it going, Charles?
Hey, it's going great. Thanks for having me on. I'm super excited to do this. I've done a few videos with Chad on ranking, and I'm feel excited to talk about these movies. So I'm pumped.
Absolutely. Yeah, as soon as we were toying around some guests, Chad was like, what about Charles? And I was like, I love that idea because I was on a Star Wars ranking with Charles, and I just remember everything that came out of his mouth. I was like, oh, where'd you meet this like film critic from? And Chad's like, he's not a film critic. And I was like, what? Because he's
No,
just so
just
well
a
spoken.
just a
Yeah.
stereotypical English major
There
that
you go.
maybe should have gotten into film criticism instead.
Yeah, and then I had the pleasure of meeting Charles in person when y'all came to New York to see Illinois. So just a really cool, just worlds colliding here on Picture This. But Charles, any background primer as to why this is the year you chose, without getting too involved in the movies themselves and what you think of them? But what
Yeah.
was intriguing about 1962?
Honestly, as soon as I saw The Music Man, that was what made me pick this one because The Music Man, as for probably many people our age, and even older than us, like it's kind of it feels like a seminal movie to like growing up. It sometimes is like people's first musicals. It's just, I don't know, it's iconic in a lot of ways to the point where I do think like Music Man is like is canonized if it
Yeah,
makes any sense. It just feels like there's so many references to the musical and other musicals. It's just and it's also a massive movie. And so for me, when I saw that on the list, I was just like, oh, I cannot wait to rewatch this because I haven't last time I watched it was when I was a kid, when I was in high school. So it
nice.
was really fun to revisit that, but also discover a bunch of other movies.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chad brought up a good point too. English teacher. We're also doing To Kill a Mockingbird, so it was just a
Yeah,
very fitting slate.
yeah,
And I'm
very
very
good point.
excited. Yeah, yeah. So it just made a lot of sense. And you know what? For a year of classics, it makes sense also that we're covering Lawrence of Arabia as one of our like 12 years of classics as well. Just because
Hmm.
this film slate does have a lot of like big, massive, influential pieces as we alluded to. But before we get into the films themselves, let me first tell everyone out there what the films are because I haven't actually listed what they are. They are we've told you three of them already, but the slate for 1962 is Lawrence of Arabia, The Longest Day, The Music Man, Mutiny on the Bounty, the remake, like the third of 5 versions. We'll get into that. And then To Kill a Mockingbird. So there are the 5 films we'll be covering today. We always like to start off with just kind of setting a stage, Chad, for the history of the year 1962. So Chad, give us a little lowdown. What was going on in 1962, my friend?
All right, yeah, I just got a little bit here. Pope John the 23rd excommunicates Fidel Castro for preaching communism.
Dang.
U.S. embargo on Cuba is announced. A grand conjunction of the classical planets occurs during a solar eclipse, meaning the 5 planets you can see with your eye, plus the sun and moon, all appear close together. I think I wrote that one while I was sleeping.
Was
or
that
falling
from
asleep.
was that from Hercules?
Maybe.
Remember?
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe that factored in. The First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, Jackie Kennedy, takes TV viewers on a tour of the White House. This one's really cool for like all you nerds out there, and me nerd as well. The Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man are introduced in the comics by Stan
wow.
Lee and Jack Kirby. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin escape from Alcatraz prison. The first Walmart is open for business. That's pretty big deal. Andy Warhol premieres his Campbell's soup cans exhibit. That's pretty famous. Speaking of famous, the Rolling Stones make their debut. Nelson Mandela is arrested for inciting a rebellion against apartheid. Johnny Carson takes over as the permanent host of The Tonight Show. The Cuban Missile Crisis occurs. And the Mona Lisa tours the United States, but not before being assessed for insurance purposes. A lot of big stuff happening in 1960.
I was gonna say, yeah, Nelson Mandela, Mona Lisa. We're hitting all the big talking points of the 60s. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of stuff. Chad, who was born in 1962? Anyone die in 1962? Any albums born in 62? Take us through all that.
All right, absolutely. Some births, some big ones. Tom Cruise, Jim Carrey,
Whoa.
Axl Rose,
Dang.
John Bon Jovi, Steve Carell, Steve Irwin, rest in peace, Demi Moore,
Dang.
Tom Kenny, Tommy Lee, Kirk Hammett, John Marshall Jones, Ray Fine, Garth Brooks, MC Hammer, Rosie O'Donnell, Evander Holyfield, Paula Abdul, Jerry Rice, Anthony Kiedis, Kate Spade, Cliff Burton, Emilio Estevez. Oh, Flea. Wow.
Flea and Anthony Kiedis.
Right?
Destined.
Another musician, Sheryl Crow, Thomas Gibson, Jodie Foster, Jeff Dunham, Wesley Snipes, Bob Odenkirk, Bo Jackson, Andre Brauer?
I thought you were going to say Andre 3000.
No. Joan Cusack, the older sister of John Cusack, Matthew Broderick, and Michelle Yeoh.
Wow.
Deaths, Marilyn Monroe,
Whoa.
Eleanor Roosevelt, Niels Bohr. We discussed Oppenheimer. He was in that. Well, sort of. Charles Lawton, Michael Curtiz, William Faulkner.
Wow.
Todd Browning, E.E. Cummings, and Frank Berzaghi. Of Seventh Heaven fame. We covered that. We covered that. Albums, I have Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music by Ray Charles, Waltz for Debbie by Bill Evans Trio, Howlin' Wolf by Howlin' Wolf, Bob Dylan by Bob Dylan, Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs,
Oh, wow.
Go by Dexter Gordon, Tous les garçons et les filles by Francois Hardy, Tijuana Moods by Charles Mingus, Jazz Samba by Stan Getz and Charlie Bird, The Bridge by Sonny Rollins.
Nice. Yeah, wow. You were listing off so many deaths, and I was like, wow, those are just like some of the most monumental people. Like,
Yeah.
we gave Casablanca our prize, so Michael Curtiz is a big one. When we talked about 57, we gave Charles Lawton an actor prize, Marilyn Monroe, Eleanor Roosevelt, some really notable names, and great albums as well.
man.
Yeah, wow, 1962, notable year, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
But we also have notable movies, and that's why we're here to talk about the movies. We always like to kind of pour one out for all the ones that didn't make the Best Picture slate. This is a very interesting year because there are still some big Oscar movies. They just didn't get Best Picture nominations. This is a year where only two of the Best Picture nominations got director nominations. So there are a lot of movies that were probably considered snubs. But Charles, as our guest, do you have any like 1962 movies that you're thinking of as potential like snubs or any notable ones to bring up?
I mean, I don't really have a lot of movies that I can think of. I'm just doing a quick Google and like looking at this right now, I think maybe one that it could be possibly have snubbed, maybe based off of ones I've seen, is maybe Lolita. That's the Stanley Kubrick one, I think.
Yeah.
I saw that a long time ago, and that was pretty good. Cape Fear and maybe Manchurian Candidate as well. But Cape Fear is, I think that's one of those movies that has only gotten better with time. But horror, and Martin Scorsese is cursed with the Oscars, so it makes sense why it didn't work out. But those could maybe be some snubs I'm kind of thinking of.
Yeah, for sure. Chad, do you have any notable films of 62 to list off?
Oh, yeah. I have, Cape Fear, the first James Bond, Dr. No, How the West Was Won, not the Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, How the West Was Won. That's a little bit different. Also Lolita, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, The Manchurian Candidate, The Miracle Worker, speaking of horror, Tales of Terror, and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Those were my notables. I haven't seen most of those. I've seen Dr. No. I think that's the only one of those I've seen, actually. Yeah. And I always try to like make one Best Picture worthy, even if I'm not sure if it actually is. But I threw in a classic horror, Carnival of Souls.
I was about to say, I was like, where's Carnival of Souls? Because I know you love that one, and then you saved it to the end. I was like, I was gonna say it to make you be like, how did I not think of that? And then yeah, the big one for me is Miracle Worker. I kind of alluded to it. This was nominated for director. It won actress and supporting actress. It's a play I love that I'm very fond of, and it was just shocking that it didn't get nominated for Best Picture, and I think that's kind of the one that people look at. And What Happened to Baby Jane, just because of the iconography of that feud and that kind of being the last movie they did together, Joan and who is it, Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. So and another, I guess it's a horror film. I haven't seen it, so I don't know if it's like a horror or more of a thriller. But
The Miracle Worker?
No, What Happened to Baby Jane?
The Miracle Worker.
Could be
now
that movie.
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I actually Googled it and I was just like, oh, it's the Helen Keller movie.
Yes.
Yeah. I have seen it, but I didn't know that it was, because I saw it when I was a kid. But now it's coming back to me. Yeah, it's coming back to me now.
It's funny because when y'all were like, we're doing 62, I was like, great. And then I was like, okay, can't wait to finally watch Lawrence of Arabia and The Miracle Worker again and To Kill a Mockingbird again. And I was like, The Miracle Worker's not nominated because I just know it won so many like big Oscars. It won actress and supporting actress for Patty Duke and oh my gosh, I'm blanking on her name, Mrs. Robinson and Bancroft. So I was just very, very surprised. So that was like the one that I wanted to really champion. But we can get into the Oscars themselves. There wasn't a lot of like big history other than like this begins the longest stretch of no wins for an actor with Peter O'Toole. He gets nominated for Lawrence of Arabia, obviously doesn't win, but him and Glenn Close currently tie with 8 nods, no wins, and he's unfortunately passed away. So he will have that record unless Glenn gets nominated for one more, loses one more. But he's at least
that's going to happen.
Yeah, I bet it will happen at least one more time. But who maybe she'll win, and then he'll be like the lone like most nominated without a win.
That is really sad. I did not know that.
Yeah, yeah. He did get an honorary Oscar eventually when he was like 90 or something, but he's never won a competitive one. I just said here only 2 films ever have won 2 acting prizes and not gotten a Best Picture nod, which is The Miracle Worker and then HUD the very next year. So Miracle Worker historic in that sense, or unhistoric, I guess. And then I did bring up the Davis and Crawford feud. What was very funny that I heard was that Joan Crawford was basically telling all the nominees that couldn't be there that she would accept on their behalf, probably to just get the one up, because Betty Davis, I believe, was nominated and Joan Crawford wasn't, but Joan Crawford knew that Anne Bancroft was on Broadway. So when Anne Bancroft won, Joan Crawford got to go up on stage and accept it as an FU to Betty Davis. So that feud is just insane. And I just love that fact that she literally was like, oh, I'll accept your award on your behalf just to get on stage because Betty couldn't. I thought that was nuts. But yeah, I love those old like Hollywood feuds and that it actually materialized at the Oscars. And that was like their last big competitive Oscars with one another as well. So an iconic moment. I need to see that miniseries that they made of the two of them. But as for the movies themselves, obviously we don't have the PGA or Critics' Choice yet, but it looked like Lawrence of Arabia was a heavy favorite. It had won the Golden Globe, it won the BAFTA. The other three movies were snubbed for the BAFTA, and then To Kill a Mockingbird, because of the British release dates, was not nominated until the next year. So really, Lawrence of Arabia was kind of the overall favorite. The Longest Day was the highest grossing film of that year, so people thought maybe that could have won, but Lawrence of Arabia was pretty much the heavy favorite going into the night, and judging by the amount of awards it won, 7, it's easy to see why it was probably not a surprise at the end of the day. But why don't we get into the conversation? And we're actually going to start, because we start alphabetically, with the Best Picture winner of the year that I just mentioned. The heavy favorite going into the night, the heavy favorite out of the night, and probably the heavy favorite in terms of legacy and just overall notoriety. Let's talk about Lawrence of Arabia. Chad, tell us about Lawrence of Arabia.
Absolutely. Lawrence of Arabia, directed by David Lean, written by Robert Bolt and Michael Wilson. Cinematography by Freddie A. Young and music by Maurice Jarre. Starring Peter O'Toole, Alec Guinness, Anthony Quinn, Jack Hawkins, Omar Sharif, Jose Ferrer, Anthony Quayle, Claude Rains, Arthur Kennedy, Donald Wolfett, and I.S. Johar. Synopsis: T.E. Lawrence questions his identity and morals as he attempts to help the Arabian people during the First World War. Based on the 1926 novel Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence.
Yeah, obviously very big, very dense. We kind of alluded to it earlier that all these movies are pretty much the longest movies for a 5-film slate we've seen thus far. But Lawrence of Arabia really takes that cake. It is like almost 4 hours, I would say, like 320 something or 3.5. Yeah, so it's like hard to know where to begin, because it's like one of those films that's so talked about, so beloved, so iconic. But this was like a first watch for me. I don't know about you guys, and it was very interesting to kind of approach it as like this very unbiased perspective, looking at it in the context of Oscars and stuff, but also like it's like, where do you even begin with this one? And I truly don't know where to begin. Charles, you're our guest. Why don't you kick us off? What do you think of Lawrence of Arabia?
I mean, Dylan, you've really took the words out of my mouth, because I'm looking at the top of my notes and I'm saying, and I wrote, not much new can be said about this movie. It's pretty incredible. I think a lot of people put this as their best movie of all time. It's like a really popular choice. This and Citizen Kane are kind of popular picks. And so this was the first time I've seen it in its entirety. The only stuff I've seen from Lawrence of Arabia is the famous snuffing of the flame, hard cut to the sun rising, which is just beautiful. And I saw a few moments of the battles later in the movie, but I've never seen it all the way through. And so this, I felt really thankful that I actually had a really strong excuse to sit down and watch it. But I think I think I would agree with most people and say that, like, I can totally see this being the most important movie ever made, because it has so much in it. Like you said, Dylan, it's extremely dense. It's a movie that you could finish by the end of your 4-hour experience, and you could rewatch a year later and get something completely different from it. And so because of that, I wrote a ton of notes, and I had so many different kind of ideas churning in my head as I was watching it. And that's honestly what I like about most movies that are like this, is that like it can inspire you. And honestly, watching this, I saw a lot of my favorite movies in it. I saw Return of the King in this movie. I saw basically Planet of the Apes in this movie. I saw I'm trying to think of, there was this another epic. I should have written this down.
Dances
but basically,
with Wolves.
Dances with Wolves is a great comparison. It just feels like the template for an epic was done here. Honestly, like Wicked, even, like, I know this isn't a musical, but like even Wicked like is following some similar lessons, I feel like, from this movie about how to tell an extremely epic story that just follows one person. I feel like that's hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah, because you look at these big historical epics and it's like, do you want to make it like a Wikipedia thing of hitting all the events, or do you want to get to the crux of who this person is? And I love how it kind of is both. It's like we're gonna expand this big historical, like textbook worth lesson, but also give you an insight who this person is in this grand sense. Like you don't have to make it feel minimal to fit the person, because this person is also very large. He has a large personality, it's a large arc, so it fits that the actual production is so gargantuan in comparison as well. Chad, what are your first thoughts? Because I know this is a first watch, I think, for all of us. Then first like full time watch.
Yeah, I really like this one quite a bit. I think like maybe with the rewatch, I could like come to like really love it. When I can like actually sit down and go over it again once I like know everything that's in it and stuff. I know like my first kind of thoughts about watching this was that I had heard people say, if you're gonna watch Lawrence of Arabia, watch it on the biggest screen you can. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that. There was, I think, one showing I saw like in the past like year or two that they had done near me, and I just didn't get around to going to it. But I still have a pretty good TV and sound system, so I think I got like a lot out of like the scope of it, the epicness of it. Like it's long, and like you could say like cut some of the stuff out, like the long walking and stuff like that. Just cut some of that stuff out. You could say that, but I think you take a lot away from it if you do that. Like I think the pacing of it is kind of perfect, and letting you kind of like meditate in the sun and stuff like that, and like really be there with Lawrence and experiencing like his whole journey. And I think it's just an incredible journey, and it's one that because I didn't really know what this movie was about going into it. So like when I finally got to the point where he's going and he's going to help the Arabian people, that's cool and all. This going to be kind of like a Dances with Wolves kind of a thing, like sort of a white savior movie. Is he just going to come and fix everybody's problems and then that's it? And then it got super interesting. Like when he like had to kill that guy that he saved, and then he went and told his superior officers about that over back in Britain, or not in Britain, but in the Britain place, or the embassy. He's telling them like, I had to kill while I was out there, and they're like, oh, no big deal. And he's like, I liked it though. And I'm like, whoa, this is getting pretty interesting. So just like, I thought like a lot of the stuff that they did with the character was like really interesting, as far as just showing the kind of like how war can be kind of like seductive, I guess I don't know, you kind of become numb to killing and stuff, maybe, in a way, and how the problems that come with that, and like how you can want to like help, and then maybe you're not helping at the end of the day, because I don't think like they really actually even like did everything that they wanted to do, and then he just like went back and was just kind of a normal guy and died really young. And so it's almost like the greatness of this man was like all of a story, and then like at some point there's even like disagreement, even in real life there's disagreement about who this guy really was. So I find all of that very fascinating. I thought you guys can discuss this. I thought the brown face that they employed was a choice. I think if
Obi-Wan.
there is, I think, I think if there is a criticism that you can wage against this, it would be that. We've seen this. We've talked about it, like with like West Side Story and stuff like that. It doesn't necessarily make the movie bad, or it doesn't, it's one of those things where it's like it's an unfortunate choice that they made. But yeah, I don't know. You guys talk about that and other things as well.
Well, you bring up so many great points. Like obviously the brown face is an important one, but like I've just been thinking back at some of the things you guys have said, so I want to kind of go back a little bit.
Sure.
The thing Charles was saying with the match, where you blow out the match and it's just the sunset. I just like even imagining a crowd watching that for the first time in a theater, because up until that point, and this is kind of what you were saying too, Chad, like you don't really know what it's about, but like you hear it's about the desert, and it opens with this motorcycle and these guys just talking in a building, and it's like you don't necessarily know where it's going, and then you get that quick cut right to the desert, and it is the most gargantuan, like big, bold, colorful shot. And I can only imagine people sitting like up close to that screen and just being like literally like taken aback by it, almost scared by the monstrosity before them, because it goes from such a tiny thing as like a little match to that grand kind of presentation. That's where you get the title. Like I just think it's one of the greatest title cuts ever. So I'm glad Charles brought that up, like first and foremost, as like the moment he remembered before even seeing it, because it is such a great moment that just kind of like really sets the tone for what it is. And I like how Chad said like he doesn't really resolve like all the like ambitions and goals and stuff. It's not all fully resolved, and that's true. The movie doesn't really end. It just ends with them like it kind of is a slow fade out as they're just driving down the desert. Because really the ending is the beginning. So like we've seen how it ends, but it's not the ending. So it's a weird kind of interesting break of form, which is telling, because two of the people who were most inspired by it, now going back to what Charles was saying about finding all those inspirations, and the most I saw was all the stuff with Spielberg. Like obviously Raiders of the Lost Ark being such a huge comparison, less adventurous. Like this one's not as much of like your serial adventure, but like in terms of its style, its scope, like I imagine the shot of the guys' silhouettes with the sun when they're like digging for the ark and stuff, like that is straight out of Lawrence of Arabia.
100%.
And I do think it's fitting, because the two people who worked on the Blu-ray restoration are Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg, who's known for the scope, and Scorsese, who's known to break form and to just tell a story that is as long as it needs to be and not necessarily have a finite ending. Like I think that's really powerful, that like you can see that still in their work for years and years to come. And like, they're the ones who took the restoration to David Lean and showed it to him and were like, hey, like, this is your movie. And Steven Spielberg was saying how cool it was that like David Lean, every scene would like basically like kind of talk them through how he made it, almost like they were getting a live director commentary, but like no one else got to hear that commentary, just Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese.
I was involved in the restoration of Lawrence, and I remember the honor of sitting next to David the first time we showed him his own film. But instead of being quiet and watching the picture for his own pleasure, he wanted to talk me through every single scene. So what we have on our DVDs today, where you've got the director talking, while you watch the picture, you got the narration on one track. It was exactly the experience I had, except it was live. And David Lean is next to me, giving me all the details, where it was shot, what Peter O'Toole was like that morning. That was a good morning for Peter, a bad morning for Peter. I mean, David was narrating the how I made Lawrence of Arabia while we were watching together Lawrence of Arabia restored. It was an amazing couple of hours for me.
So I just think that's so cool. And you can kind of see like the echoes of this wave kind of throughout their careers. But I just thought that was great, like how you brought up so many films that inspired, and like I thought of a million other films too, because it is so, such a template. It really does set so much groundwork, because it is so large. You can pull things from any part of it. It doesn't have to just be a replica. You can take the style of this, or the scope of this, or even like Chad said, like the kind of corruption of innocence that we see in stuff like The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, television, even, where it's like not even set in the desert. It's not even an epic story, but it's about that kind of corruption of innocence. So I think there's just so much you can pull from this, which is just really, really fascinating. But we can
Breaking
get back
Bad and Better Call Saul.
Yeah, there you go. Better Call Lawrence, I guess.
Yeah.
Can I just interject one thing? That because you brought up Breaking Bad, there was a line, I don't exactly remember when this was said, but there's a line where Lawrence says, "Do you think I'm just anybody?" And when he said that to me, I was like, "That's it. That's his 'I'm the one who knocks' moment."
Yeah.
Like
Really, really good point, Chad, because you're right. I think this happens before the war crime or after. It's like it's somewhere around then when he kind of breaks bad. And he breaks bad in a very realistic and sad way, just like like you said, Dylan, a lot of the anti-heroes we watch all the time on TV, like I am sure a lot of people, especially the actors involved, were inspired by Peter O'Toole's performance here, because it's like it's insanely good. I feel like there are parts of this movie that, because we brought up Brownface before, that's a clear part that does not age well. Although Alec Guinness, he's good. Like he's great. He's great in it. He's just not. He just has. It's just it's frustrating. It's a frustrating performance because
Yeah.
he's really good in it. He's arguably, like, seeing him in that now, I almost like find him more believable in the brown face than him in Star Wars, even though he's great in Star Wars too. It's just he's great in it, but the brown face is a clear detraction from the movie, and it's the biggest flaw. But like, there are so many other things in this movie that age super well and were like vastly ahead of its time. I know we're going to get into the other movies later, but I think there's a lot of themes that the other movies try to tackle that this movie just nails on such a stronger basis.
Mm-hmm.
It deals with race and colonialism and even queerness, and like a really fascinating and way ahead of its time methods. In particular, I feel like the anti-colonialism messages are fascinating to watch, knowing that this is like 6 years before Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, several decades before we get involved into the Middle East War, decades after the British and America just completely ravaged Africa and South America. And you watch this movie in the 1960s, and it is fairly woke for its time. And I think it's fascinating that Lawrence himself is shown with nuance. He is a white savior in some parts, but he directly confronts that. There's a great moment where Sharif tugs on his clothes, and he says, when you return back to the embassy, are you going to be wearing this as a costume? Basically, like saying like, white man, are you going to pretend that like you're with us and then you're not really with us?
Right.
Like, are you just a
Yeah.
white savior? That's basically what they're having. They're having a conversation about that, but they're not using the same terminology we use today. And it's a good reminder that like these conversations and conflicts and social change that some people are fighting for today, like a lot of it was started back then, but with different words. And it's really sad that like by the end of the movie, Lawrence has failed and colonialism has won. And it didn't really win because they tried to win. It won naturally. There was nothing that could be done by the end. Lawrence thought he could do it as one man, or he thought him along with all of the different Arabian tribes could do it. But like by the end of the movie, it's pretty clear that colonialism is always going to be far stronger than any tribalism that we would hope to use. But yeah, it's a wonderful movie, and I feel like Lawrence himself is not a perfect human being, but he is a perfect human character. Like he represents the best in a lot of us, but he represents also the worst, and he just goes back and forth in a way that's like just so relatable in a weird way. But yeah, just a lot of things in this movie still really, really hold up today.
Yeah. And the fact that he's a real guy, I think, also helps kind of excuse the white savior. Because a lot of the times, the white savior movies, it's like the director's white and they're kind of portraying their own outlook of like, oh, I'm doing good by creating this character who like, no. And I think that's the thing is like, this is authentic. This is real. So like, this is just his story. It's not even like purposely trying to be a white savior story. It just is by nature. It's not like you're creating a narrative to like appease yourself. It's like the narrative's there for you. It's just how you tell it. Yeah. Chad?
100%.
Yeah, no, I mean, I actually love I love listening to Charles talk about his thoughts and then like wanting to, revisit the movie, thinking about a lot of that, Dylan as well. But like, I think it's just really interesting because he talked about like the white savior thing being sort of a theme in the movie. Like it's not the filmmakers making a white savior movie. It's that's kind of what he was doing maybe at first, and then he started to actually not fall in line, but like actually start to care about like what's going on instead of like maybe making a name for himself or anything like that. Like at the very beginning, because I know like they put him in that situation because I don't think they really liked him and stuff like that. And so they were like, let's just send him to the desert. And then he started doing all of these like kind of nuanced things that were like kind of stupid. and then you're just like, that's not a good decision. To the point where I started to get really frustrated with this character when he's marching everybody into the desert, and they're like, there's no regards for any of their lives, no regards for like the camels' lives. Of course, I think about that.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just like, this dude is such an idiot. And then like I get really mad, but then like as it starts to get really like complex, and he starts to like make better decisions, and the things that he does do, like wins people over and stuff like that, it started to make me go like, I don't like hate this character anymore. I actually find him really endearing and stuff, and it's just so complex that you can dislike the character at times, but then get on board with him at times, and then feel sorry for him at times, like when he's tortured and stuff like that, but then like want him to win, like when he stands up for this kid that he brings to the the embassy, that they don't even want to give him water because of racism, and then he's like, and then they're all kind of making fun of his garb and stuff like that, and he's defending it and things like that. So it's just a really, really interesting movie that, like, despite its length, and this is true with a lot of the great movies like Oppenheimer and The Godfather and stuff like that, where despite its length, it's one that I want to revisit multiple times in the near future, and just kind of like love watching it. And you can't say that about most 3-hour movies.
Well, and it's also because it's not just what the story is and what the themes are, but also back to what we were saying from the very top, the epicness of it, the way it is and the way it breathes and the way it feels and the tone. That's why you want to rewatch some big epics, is not because they have these epic stories. More so, it is you just like being in that world. You like sitting with these characters and like sitting in this beautiful, vast landscape. And I do think the setting is also just such a testament to just what you can do with filmmaking, that like I really don't think you could make this again. Like, we've seen West Side Story, for example. Like, the brown face was bad. We remade it. We were able to correct those issues. We were able to introduce transgender characters. We were able to just like modernize it in a really interesting way, get some authentic language. You could remake that film. This you can't, because as much as you want to believe you can, you don't make movies like this anymore. You don't get to go like the closest thing to this is Dune, and even then there's still so much visual effects, so much green screen still used. This was purely authentic, every single grain of sand. Like, and I think that's something to be said too. Like, literally every take, oh shoot, we have to go brush away all the footsteps in the sand to retake this next take. Like, just the little things where every shot takes a day. And it's like, that is just not what the modern landscape of movie making is nowadays, to where we will never see, I don't think, an epic on this scale in this way, as authentic and as practical as this is. And I think that's also another reason why it is such a intoxicating watch to go back to, because it's like, I just want to live in that. I want to feel the sand through the screen. I want to feel that heat, and that's something that this movie does that not a lot can. And I do agree with Chad. I want to see this on a big screen, and I hope when they do re-release it, if they release it, which I think they will, they do occasionally, I hope I can see this as big as possible, because it's just gorgeous.
Yeah, you make a good point about the technique, and it is like important that we give space to that, because the technique in this movie is crazy. I legitimately think that, like, if you gave this movie to like a beginner filmmaker, they would be able to like practice so many different, like, just absolutely necessary shots, but also composition. They would be able to practice with blocking with this movie. There's an editing too. The editing is just incredible in this movie. The soundtrack also deserves a shout out. That theme for Lawrence of Arabia is just epic. And it goes through different stages depending on the tone. Sometimes it sounds more mournful. Sometimes it's jubilant and heroic. It's really wonderful. That the soundtrack person for Mutiny on the Bounty did a good job on that too. But anyways, I'm getting off track. But the technique in this movie is incredible, and I think out of all the sequences that were really impressive, the one that like really stood out to me was the one where they freed all those horses from the trains, and the camera just lingers on that moment, and you just see hundreds of horses just jumping off. And the whole time I was watching, I was just thinking, dear God, I hope they only had to shoot this once, because I cannot imagine resetting this sequence. And it's just like I would say like maybe a fourth of this movie is just, it's like you're a journalist and you have like a camera and you're just like up like in the hill or the deserts somewhere, and you're just watching everything from afar. There's no dialogue. You're just watching what could have even occurred back then. Um, it's an incredible movie.
And
Yeah.
it's just like the way it takes its time, I think
Mhm.
is incredible.
Yeah.
You're talking about like the complex shots, but then like the simple shots where, it's just the tension that's built from seeing something approaching from afar, and then like it becomes clearer and clearer, but it takes a long time for the guy on the horse to show up.
The well sequence. Yeah.
Yeah, which is like fantastic, the way they set that up. And then like, you talked about the music, the way this starts with like, I don't know, was it like a 5 minute like black screen, just music, just
Yeah.
overture, just
Overture.
waiting for the movie to start, and you're just like, you're in for something like truly epic. And yeah, it's a masterpiece.
Yeah, the one shot, it's funny because like of all the shots in this movie, the one I keep coming back to is not even a desert shot. It's that opening POV motorcycle shot, because it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
when you think about how big and how heavy those cameras were, how did they get a POV first person motorcycle shot going full speed down the road
Mhm.
with perfect color and perfect lighting, and the camera's not going like this, like it's perfectly mounted to where it's smooth.
Yeah.
That's one of where I'm just like, I don't know how they did. Like the desert scenes are great, but it's also like you can just hold the camera and do this. But the motorcycle, it's like you're on a vehicle that's moving, and it's so crisp, so clear. Like there's just some stuff in this movie where I'm like, I don't know how they do it. I just can't. I can't fathom it.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Yeah, Lawrence of Arabia, man. I'm glad we all checked it out.
This movie sucks.
They're just walking through deserts, and it's boring.
Boring.
No dance sequences.
Where's the sandworm? That's Lawrence of Arabia. It wins
that would have been epic.
seven Oscars out of 10. The only ones it doesn't win are some big ones. It doesn't win actor for Peter O'Toole, doesn't win supporting actor for Omar Sharif, and it doesn't win adapted screenplay, but it does win picture, director for David Lean, musical score, as we've talked about, sound, art direction, color, cinematography, color, and editing. So it's basically like the technical masterpiece of the year. It's the best film of the year, the best music of the year. Just the script and acting is not quite as good as one of the other films. Like that's basically what the Academy is saying, and I think it is held up, and we will talk about it when we get there. But I mean, watching this film, it does feel like The Longest Day, but why don't we transition into a film that is quite literally The Longest Day, that because of its length could also be considered maybe the longest watch, depending. Chad, tell us about The Longest Day.
I'm sorry, I've just been like thinking about how T.E. Lawrence is the Lisan Al Gaib, and I can't just get that out of my head now. All right, sorry. The Longest Day, directed by Ken Anakin, Andrew Martin, and Bernard Wicki. Needed 3 people to direct this thing. Written by Cornelius Ryan, Romaine Gary, James Jones, David Purcell, and Jack Seddon. Cinematography by Jean Bourgoin, sorry, Walter Watitz, and music Wattitz, sorry, music Maurice. It's never going to get better. I'm going to keep doing this over and over and over. I apologize. Music by Maurice Jari, starring a lot of people. Henry Grace, Alexander Knox, Arthur Hill, Henry Fonda, John Wayne, Red Buttons, Trevor Reed, John Robinson, Simon Lack, Leo Ginn, Peter Lawford, Patrick Barr, Gene Survey, Christian Marquand, George Riviere, Bernard Fresson, Irina Dimick, Paul Hartman, Werner Heinz, Wolfgang Lukshi, Ernst Schroeder, Kurt Jurgens, and Richard Munch. Synopsis. Different nations prepare for the D-Day event at Normandy, based on the 1959 novel The Longest Day by Cornelius Ryan.
Yes. Very interesting. Yes. So many actors, so many writers, so many directors, obviously because it's telling so many different stories and perspectives. But really it is kind of more of a Daryl Zanuck joint than anything else. He's the producer, but he's the one who's kind of like bringing the Avengers together, bringing a team together, kind of overseeing it all. So this very much feels like your classic Hollywood, like this is the producer's movie. It's just like these are kind of the people for hire that you appointed in all these different areas and stuff. Because that's what it is. It's like a fragmented story that ultimately is telling a larger historical piece story, but it really is about these different perspectives, and it bounces around, and there's a lot of characters, a lot of actors, and as Chad listed, too many to list and name, but yeah, The Longest Day, I think this was also a first watch for all of us, if I'm not mistaken. So we started with Charles last time. We'll start with you, Chad, this time. What did you think of The Longest Day?
I was kind of hoping you wouldn't start with me.
Do you want me to start? Because I'll just say it's boring as shit. Yes. I mean, hey, listen, I have a lot of respect. I have a lot of respect for, just the idea of we're going to tell this story from every perspective. It's a cool idea, but it's just like it's 3 hours, and the D-Day stuff, which comes an hour and a half in, is interesting, but it's also like we've seen it now with other better technology, other filmmakers' POVs on it, and from more singular perspectives to where we can engage more with the characters.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm at an arm's length from this. I'm like, the style in that second half is fantastic. It's probably, maybe arguably, I'm not going to say it is better, but it rivals the Steven Spielberg Saving Private Ryan opening in terms of its style, but it's the emotional investment is not there because you've now been bouncing around and around, where I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, Sean Connery. Oh yeah, that's right, Henry Fonda. These big names that I'm like, oh shit, yeah, I forgot they were there. I just think it's for a movie at this length and with the title, The Longest Day, you would think they would use that time to really flesh out the characters, but instead they just keep adding. It's the quantity over quality argument, and it's a lot of quantity, not a lot of quality, in my opinion. But that's kind of where I'm kind of at as a blanket for this film.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. I mean, that's why, like, I didn't even know where to begin with this. And also, I guess I forgot to mention Sean Connery. He didn't come up when I was looking up the names. But there's so many names to go through. There's so many people. Like, it's kind of like an epic production, as like Dylan was kind of saying. Like, it is something to marvel at, but it's like, because it's like a neo documentary style, where it's kind of just trying to show you what this thing was like accurate, trying to be like really accurate and stuff. But yeah, what it forgot about was to actually like tell a story. I'm not saying every single movie needs to tell a story, but like it's not in this one in particular, to me, is not really interesting on its own, and it's not really doing anything that really like grabs me. Like, there's no characters to really focus on. Even if there's like one that pops up that you might want to focus on, they cut away to something else. And I think it is kind of like a really cool achievement. It kind of reminds me a little bit of something like, In Which We Serve, that we covered, which kind of feels kind of like that. It's kind of like a mishmash of a lot of, I wouldn't call this one like propaganda like I called that one, but like this one, it's still just kind of like a blanket of war. It doesn't really have a statement or anything that's going on. It's just showing you what it was about. There's a couple parts though where I was like, is this going to end up being kind of a comedy? Because like there was like a specific part.
Oh my god.
When the Germans were sitting there talking, they were like, can we get the Panzers to go and do this thing? And they were like, no, the Fuhrer's asleep. And maybe it's because we just watched The Great Dictator, and I'm in kind of like that mindset of like, you can make World War II funny, get in the right hands, like a Great Dictator or Jojo Rabbit or Life is Beautiful kind of thing way. And then I'm like, the Fuhrer's asleep, we can't do anything. And then they're just all kind of like sitting around like waiting. Like, I could have like maybe done with some comedy or something like certain way. That actually would have maybe like got me to get on some sort of wavelength to be like, I'm actually enjoying this. So yeah, ultimately it just couldn't grasp on anything. It really frustrated me.
Yeah. Charles, I have a feeling I know where you stand. You've been interjecting a bit, but tell us your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I think this movie's awful. I think it's one of the worst movies legitimately I have seen, like in terms of classic movies.
Yeah.
There are some really like beautiful parts to it, but like for instance, like I think the church bell sequence is well referenced. That is pretty iconic and very overwhelming, which is I think what they want you to feel during that sequence. And I love the sequence where the French undercover agents are trying to shut down that railroad and that train. Super cool espionage, and then they just disappear into the ether, and then we're supposed to like get attached to Sean Connery for the rest of the movie, which is annoying. But I really like those undercover people. And then the beautiful helicopter shot for like a minute when they're raiding the bridge. I looked that shot up because I was just fascinated by that. It was just beautiful one shot. And apparently they used mostly veterans from that for that shot. So like
Ooh.
they basically, it was just hundreds of veterans that were running and recreating that moment. So I think that is just incredible. But there is so much I hate about this movie. It's the, I, I guess to put it, because there are some things I like it, but I think if I had to sum up my opinion about it, it felt like, Chad, I think you were kind of getting at this where it felt like it was going for quantity over quality, but it was also trying to be so many different movies. And it just felt like, I guess maybe Dylan, your backstory kind of makes sense. This does totally seem like a producer run movie. And I think most producer run movies are just terrible.
Yeah.
And the reason I didn't like this, but I know that this movie has a lot of fans out there. I totally know because I went online and there's some people feverishly defending this movie, and I love that you love this movie. I think everybody needs that. But I think there are movies that are classic that accomplish this, what they wanted to, way better. Tor comes out 8 years later and is far more engaging, but also does a much better job of showing both the enemy perspective and the allied perspective. And this one, yes, we get to spend time with German officers, but we don't spend any time with German foot soldiers. We don't actually get any time to spend with the German, like the Nazis on the ground, like we get to spend with like the 15 different like completely like unrecognizable comedy effect people that die in the second half of this movie.
Yeah.
I just feel like Chad, I respect your opinion, how you feel like this isn't propaganda. I think it's propaganda. But like, if I'm being honest, though, if I'm being more fair to it, and I went in the middle, I guess I could see maybe it could be useful as a documentary. But there are documentaries that tell a more engaging story and narrative than this. It is so frustrating to watch because I think ultimately a good war movie should show you how awful war is. But
Yeah.
I finished this movie and it just seemed like it was something that a bunch of famous people showed up to and cracked jokes, and then a bunch of unlucky people like died around them. It was it's like a movie. I legitimately look at the Rotten Tomatoes score and I'm like, how does it even? It's in the 90s.
Yeah.
It has
Wow.
like a higher score than I think one of the Toy Stories. It's shocking to me, but I
How
think
many people reviewed it?
It's probably like 4 people, and like one of them, I don't know.
and it
Like,
was and Dylan, you said this was the most profitable movie that year.
so yeah, it was the highest grossing film of that year, and
Oh
I
my
think it's
God.
so in 1960, and this is I find it's very telling when the backstory of a movie is much more interesting than the movie itself.
Yeah.
But I was reading a lot about the backstory, which I was actually engaged with, which was, they released a book called The Longest Day, June 6, 1944, D-Day, which came out in March of 1960. So this was a hot book that I think people were like, all right, who's getting the
Oh,
rights to it? And Zanuck
that's
was like,
fascinating.
dibs. And I think also like, yeah, it's interesting because I think studio and producer run films, they were a norm of like the 30s and 40s when they
Yeah.
needed to be, when the world was at war. Like Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, we don't love Gone with the Wind here as much, but like Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, two of the greatest films of all time, are
Mhm.
studio run films. Victor Fleming is a producer. He's not a director. He's who's credited as the director for those movies. Those movies are fantastic. The thing is, that was just what the system was like. Now,
Mhm.
20 years later, this is a time where Alfred Hitchcock has made the leap from Britain to America, and he's making films in his own way. David Lean, another example of an auteur. Stanley Donen makes Singing in the Rain a decade before, like his own stamp on
Mhm.
the musical.
Good
Jerry
point.
Wise, Jerome Roberts. Like, there's so many auteurs now, so many like distinct voices now that like the old school method just doesn't work as much. Like, I feel like if this movie were made at the time of the events themselves, like in the mid 40s, maybe it is more successful because that's just how they operated. But I think they're trying to going back to an old school method to tell a story of a hot new book that was about events from 20 years prior. And I just feel like it doesn't work because of that. And I do think I like the approach of like, let's get a German writer to help like fine tune the German scenes, a French writer to get those scenes, a British writer to get those scenes, Germans, British, American. But the problem is it feels like they all didn't talk with one another. It was more so you do that, you do that, you do that, you do that. And it then just becomes not two, but like 4 or 5 tonally clashing. As Chad said, some of it seems like it could be funny, but it's not. Some of them are super serious. Some of them actually care about the characters. Some don't. Some feel propagandistic. Some don't. And you know, this is one where I think if you were to redo this in some way or shape or form, maybe make it a miniseries. Have a German director do an episode from the German perspective. Have a French director do a French story from a French perspective instead of trying to tell all of them at once in 3 hours, which is long for a movie. But if you think about it, if you're telling all these different stories, it's not nearly enough time. But because it's long and because it's scattered, it still feels its length because it's not well done. So it's like all the worst things that could go wrong, you know?
I was gonna say, well, a couple things. I was gonna say, I think Dylan needs to be a producer. That was a pretty good idea.
That's what I was gonna say.
To make the Longest Day miniseries. But hey, if anyone watches this, like, and HBO is like, come on, I'll do it.
Maybe you could be like the Edward Berger, you know, style, like remaking The Longest Day into
with like a really cool score to be like War Rocks. I will never do that.
But I did want to add, because something from what Charles was saying is that Charles, I know to be, because his favorite movie is The Thin Red Line, actually, which we have covered. And he's a huge anti-war guy. He would fit in exactly with our show, because Dylan and I are anti-war people as well. And so I think that is exactly what you said, Charles. Like another reason why this doesn't, because like we love the original All Quiet on the Western Front, and like how it kind of feels similar to this, but like much better, because it does have like a point, like all the scenes that have, like, I mean, you do have a central character to follow and stuff, but like all the scenes, you know, that happen have some sort of like anti-war statement, you know, and I feel like just kind of like throwing it all on the floor, like, you know, hey, this is war, like what is it, like you mentioned Saving Private Ryan, even that in some ways, like, you know, is just showing what war is, and doesn't necessarily make a statement until it is trying to make a statement. And even then, I still feel like what it's showing still has a tint of, look how barbaric this shit is. And like, this is like insane. You would not want to be there. No, this shouldn't happen to people. And I feel like, you know, like you were saying, Charles, like this doesn't really feel like it has that, like a driving force to it. They just, I just wanted to make a movie, and I don't know.
It's a popular book they wanted to capitalize on for money, and they did. I mean, it was the highest grossing film of the year, so it worked. But it's also like, And another thing you brought up, Charles, was the fact that they used actual veterans, which I think is cool until you think about it longer, and you're like, why subject them to reliving?
Such a good point, because they use them apparently for the beach scenes too, and like those beach scenes, they're using their budget like heavily for those scenes, like explosions going off everywhere, like you see a bunch of people like fall to their death, but they couldn't show blood, so like when someone explodes, they just go like that.
They got 700 signed on. Hundreds had to leave for the Berlin crisis of 1961, so they had to go back into active duty. So they had 500 British soldiers and 250 Army soldiers as extras in this
epic
movie.
It's I think it just this. I mean, we've done a good job of showing that. Like, I don't think this movie holds up as much, and I think there are some really beautiful things in this movie and some really interesting things. I think I really am curious to see who directed the church sequence, because I think that one shows the most creativity, and it's the closest I got to being like, man, it must have been terrifying to be in their shoes. But like that's the only moment. Like when you see that one parachuter, he just falls straight into the well, and it just holds on that shot, and then you see the thing fall down with him, and you know what's happening to him in that well, right? But it doesn't show it, and it's just like it's. I think there's a good movie in this. There's definitely a good movie. Even like with the footage that's there, I think someone could like edit it into something that's actually really atmospheric. Like the final scene is really interesting too,
Mhm.
where you just those two soldiers interact with each other. One that we saw shoot a ton of people, and then one that never shot anyone. Um, and you can even see like parts that were elaborated on into really great stories. Like if you've ever seen Band of Brothers, I thought of their D-Day episode a lot in this, because there's even a sequence where you see the 101st Airborne in the movie, and they're walking and they're completely scattered, which is what happens in Band of Brothers too. But they pick up someone from another unit, and they're like, yeah, just join us. And then because it's the longest day, we don't follow that really interesting story of one person in a completely different regiment. But
Yeah.
we don't necessarily, I guess, need it, because Band of Brothers has an episode about that. And I think that's one of the things I guess I did appreciate about watching this, is that I saw that like maybe Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks watched The Longest Day before they made Band of Brothers, and we're like, honestly, there's some good stuff here. I think we can
Improve.
definitely take this and run with it,
Yeah.
because yeah, I don't know. It's a frustrating movie, and I don't like it, and I don't know if I'll ever see it again, but I appreciate the effort and time that they put into it, because
Yeah.
man,
Yeah.
lots.
And yeah, the technology of it, and I think there's some reviews I read where they're like, well, you have Saving Private Ryan, so like, why do you even need any old films anymore? And I think Chad brought up a great point with All Quiet on the Western Front. Like, you can still have
Yes.
really good old films telling these themes and doing these things. Like it's not the fact that it is old; it's the fact that it just was done better. You know?
Yeah, Bridge
And
Over the River Kwai as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
With Alec Guinness.
Yeah.
Another
Yeah.
great one.
Yeah, another one that's not directly, D-Day, but like Dunkirk is another example of like you have all
Oh,
these different like
yeah.
storylines and characters going on. You're telling Earth, Land, and Sea, or whatever it is, air, land, and sea. That's what it is.
Mhm.
A nonlinear storytelling, all the Christopher Nolan stuff, but you're still finding character moments. You're still giving us that boy and his dad on the boat, and like the soldiers bonding together. You give us something, and it's only 3 perspectives rather than like 8. So even that is a good example of like done slightly better than this. Much better.
And you
Great
mentioned
comparison.
Bridge on the River Kwai, also David Lean.
Yeah.
Really? I did
Yeah,
not know that.
he could have
Dang,
made a better Longest Day.
100%.
Made it really long, even longer.
That brings up a good point, because honestly, maybe one of the reasons I'm so hard on this is I watched this right after Lawrence of Arabia, and they felt like they both existed in completely different planets.
Yeah.
Like even though this movie is epic, there are so many blurry shots. There are so many like just terribly composition shots where like you're supposed to, I guess, get the idea that they're underneath the bottom of a ship, but instead you're just seeing a guy on his bunk bed. There's no like wide shots to show everything. It's just, I don't know. It just technically, this was just not even close to the same level as Lawrence. And there was only like really a few shots that made me feel that way. And it's like, you have similar elements. Like there are moments where it's just a bunch of officers in a room talking about things that are going wrong or things that are going right, but it's engaging in Lawrence of Arabia because of the way it's shot and the way it's soundtracked and the composition, and the people are constantly moving. But in The Longest Day, they're just like, just stand in the shot and like act in place, don't move. We're just going to keep the camera on you. But that's not interesting. It's just
Right.
I definitely think David Lean, if he was given this, he could turn this into a good movie, I think.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out what the inflation is, and I can't really, but this did make $15 million, highest grossing of the year,
Wow.
edging out Lawrence of Arabia by like 200,000. So Lawrence of Arabia was number 2. So I guess they were in the mood for big long epics. They just didn't know until after they bought their ticket. Yeah, crazy. Yeah, that's The Longest Day. It wasn't the worst day though on the Oscars for Longest Day because it still won 2 awards out of 5. It won Best Cinematography, Black and White, and it won Special Effects. So
Yeah,
those are
that
the
one
two
makes
probably
sense.
both most deserving if you're going to give them anything. But it was also nominated for picture, for art direction, Black and White, and for film editing. So yep, it went 2 for 5. How many extras did I say? Did I say 76 extras? No, I'm not sure how many extras, but you know what I do have 76 of? I have 76 trombones, and we're going to talk about The Music Man, Chad.
I knew where you
Charles
were
is
going with that.
experiencing my segues in real time. Yeah,
As
I love
soon
it.
as you said 76, I knew what you were doing.
Yeah.
The Music Man, directed by Morton DaCosta, written by Robert Burke, cinematography by, actually didn't write that one down. I apologize.
Robert
Music by-
Burks.
What a weird name. Oh, I'm just
Wait,
kidding.
Robert Burks also did cinematography?
Yes, Alfred Hitchcock's cinematographer.
Oh.
Robert Burks did the
Wait. Then who wrote it? I'm sorry. I'll figure this out in a second.
Marion Hargrove wrote the screenplay.
Thank you. Music by Meredith Wilson and Ray Heindorf. I apologize. Starring Robert Preston, Shirley Jones, Buddy Hackett, Hermione Gingold, Paul Ford, Kurt Kelton, the Buffalo Bills, Timmy Everett, Susan Lucky, and little baby Ronnie Howard. Synopsis.
Oh.
A con man attempts to swindle a town by posing as a music teacher, but doesn't expect to fall in love. Based on the 1957 musical, The Music Man by Meredith Wilson and Franklin Lacey. And no, not the football team, the Buffalo Bills. Another Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, it's funny because I just on the note of Ronnie Howard, I was like, this kid is such a terrible singer, but he's so adorable. I don't mind. And I was like, who is this kid? Did he grow up to do anything?
Oh my God, you didn't recognize him?
No, because I've never seen a young Ron. I didn't watch whatever the
Andy
what is it?
Griffith Show.
Days?
Andy Griffith. Yeah, I didn't watch any of
Andy
that.
Griffith Show, yeah.
I was just watching him. I was like, because he's always been Winthrop to me. Because I grew up watching this was.
Oh.
I didn't know this was Ron Howard. So I was like, I was like, oh, who is that kid? Oh,
like, and the Wells Fargo.
In the
Wells
Fargo wagon.
wagon. Gosh, cutie pie. Yeah, Music Man. I mean, Charles mentioned that this was the reason he picked this slate, so I kind of want to start with him, even though I know Chad. I think were you the first watcher here, Chad, of the three of us?
Or I've only seen this once.
Okay, yeah. So you were the first time watcher, but Charles is the one who picked it for this. So I want to go to Charles first, and then I'll go to Chad. So Charles, what are your thoughts on The Music Man?
Yeah, this movie I think still holds up in a lot of ways. It was still really enjoyable to rewatch. I actually, out of the 5, this was the one that I watched with my wife, and she was really excited too because she grew up watching this all the time. And so when we watched it together, actually a few days ago, it just kind of felt special. We kept pausing at times, laughing at other parts, like telling stories, because for us, it was just so iconic and relatable. Rewatching it, I really enjoyed it because I found some things I didn't like as much and some things I liked more. But I think the thing that stayed the most consistent for me is I remember loving the music when I was a kid, and I really loved the music this time around. There really wasn't many songs I didn't like. I think it's as strong as a lot of musicals out there. And I know, Chad, you love musicals, so I'll toss it over to you if you're ready. What did you think?
Sure. I actually love this one, and I didn't expect to. I think because I had heard certain things, there's the one Shapoopy song, and then there's the Native American stuff that they do at one point, the little exhibit where they're dressing.
It's clearly meant to make them look cringe, though. It's supposed to.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it's to show that these people are horrible.
Okay, all right. Well, I didn't actually get
context
that
does matter.
But I will say there's a couple things that were questionable.
Yeah.
I think that's one song is not supposed to be problematic or whatever. Other than that, because that's all I really knew about it going in. So I was like, oh no, is this another Gigi that I'm gonna experience? I didn't know. I didn't know. I was like, is it a Gigi or is it a tell me the 1968 Oliver?
Yeah.
and it's more of an Oliver. I had so much fun with this movie. I thought it was hilarious. That was actually my favorite part of the movie, is that it was so funny, and I just didn't expect it to be that funny and silly. Where like he's a con man trying to like swindle this town, and like every time they try to catch him, he has a clever way to distract, and it's just like so funny. Like the people who are trying to investigate him, he turns them into like a barbershop quartet. And he just teaches them like you sing, you go high, you go a little bit lower, you go a little bit lower, and then every time like they try to question him, he gets them to sing. I think that's hilarious. I love that when the town is kind of like on to him, the Wells Fargo wagon shows up and they get really excited and start like, hey, maybe it's got something for me. That's such a fun moment. One of his friends shows up and he's an anvil salesman. I think he like he says that like anvil salesmen are kind of like they don't really serve a use because nobody wants to buy anvils really, but he comically can carry this thing around with ease, but when he like puts it down on the ground and has the comic like clang every time, and it was so loud in my speaker every time he put it down.
I was gonna say the anvil joke sneaks up on you every time. Yeah, just clarify. It's his enemy, not his friend. It's the guy who's trying to sell him out. But it is fun. It is funny. It is so funny because it's like that's also a character that isn't funny. He's just like the villain, but then you give him that thing, and it's like everyone has a little bit to do, which is great.
Yeah. And I just thought it was like a really cute story. Like I love at the ends, like when because it is a character you're not supposed to like because he's doing bad stuff, but then like he slowly it's kind of like Lawrence of Arabia a little bit, where he starts off like really kind of not doing the right thing, and you kind of like are going like this guy's not good, and then like he slowly becomes more endearing as like he starts to fall in love with the town and the people and the one woman, and I love how at the end the town kind of like helps him, not come to justice because they're like, it doesn't matter. Like he's here for good now, I guess. And I love how because he hasn't really been doing work to help these kids play well. So when they do play, it all sounds really bad. To you, but then you get to see like the rose-colored glasses of all the parents that are just like, my kid's playing, oh my god, this is so amazing. And I feel like that would be me if like Elliot's doing anything. I'd be like, this is the best thing in the world. It's the classic oh, what was your favorite part? Well, you were, honey. It's like, no, but like what was actually your favorite part? But it is, because as parents you're like, and I can't speak on this, but it's like, no, like that is what it is. It's that your kid's doing it. It's not that they're good at it or bad at it. If anything, it's more endearing that they're bad at it because they love it, and that's what you love to see. Yes, I just had so much fun with this movie. It has a pretty interesting, unique story, and it's just a really fun. I mean, just like Oliver, it's just a really fun musical to watch. That I liked almost every song. Like Charles was saying, it's got a lot to it.
Yeah, it's the problem I have with every musical from like the golden age whenever we cover it here, because I can't separate the nostalgia from it to where like I can't look at it critically. But then when assigned it's our show, but it's like, like when looking at this in the perspective of this, it's like, okay, what can I be critical of? I'm like, do I love the romance? Does it all make sense? Probably not. Like, do some little moments here and there feel a little dated, maybe squeeze her once when she isn't looking, get a squeeze back, that's fancy cooking.
But
like she could be,
Anne and I paused after that. We were like, what did he say that? Is that
but the thing is, it's like,
Charles, real quick, Charles, if that was really cringe to you, just watch the first like 5 minutes of Gigi. with
Oh
Hannah.
no.
And
Oh
let's
no.
see what happens with that.
Read the list of songs in Gigi. You don't even have to listen to any of them. Just read the titles. Read the first title. No, but
Right.
it's one of those movies where like Charles, like this is one I grew up with. I watched a lot. I actually did the show my first year of middle school in sixth
Oh,
grade.
cool.
I auditioned for it. I was the only sixth grader called back for Harold Hill, but my voice hadn't changed yet. But my director had me audition for it, and I was just mortified. And then I got a part in the Barbershop Quartet, so I was the highest part of the Barbershop Quartet. I was Jason's
Oh, that's
friend.
so
awesome.
cool.
So
How can there be any sin insincere, or we sincerely in love? Oh, we're in love.
yeah, so but with that also comes the trauma where it's like when you do a show and it's like you're a sixth grader and you're put through a lot of work and you're put through the ringer because barbershop
Mhm.
music is difficult for 4
Mhm.
kids to learn in sixth
Yeah.
grade. Because
Different
my
octaves and-
two other friends were sixth graders, and then the fourth one, the bass was an eighth grader, obviously because their voices had changed by then. But it was very fun because I have great memories of it, but I also have memories of our music teacher at the time. She was a smoker, so her room had a smell to it. And we were just like, everyone was rehearsing, and it was the 4 of us in her little music room, stuffy music room, singing the same songs over and over and over. Light a rose, I'm home. I'm like, oh my God, to where like now. Right now, when I hear those songs, shout out Miss Thomas if you're listening. I know she just had a grandson, so
And
congratulations.
she wasn't a con man, by the way.
Yeah,
She's a legit music
she literally
teacher.
just had a grandson earlier this week. So shout out Miss Thomas if you're listening. But,
Oh, wow.
but it was like one of those things where I just have all those memories of just in the choir room. All right, do it again, do it again, do it again, which is great discipline. It's great to like get kids singing barbershop. But I remember being like, oh, I wish I could hang out with the rest of the cast that are on stage doing the Wells Fargo wagon and we're in the music room. Ice cream, just like over and over and over again.
Ice cream.
But that's the thing is like I have those memories, and now whenever I hear Music Man on the radio, I'm always like, oh, pick a little, talk a little, skip. But now like when I watch it in the movie, I'm like,
Yeah.
it just brings back a comforting feel. It brings back a nostalgia, it brings back a warmth, a fun. And like when on Family Guy, when Peter Griffin bursts out into singing Shapoopy and then does the whole song, I'm like, oh my God. And you start to see like this in other influences and in other things that has spun off of it and spoofed it. And
She's the girl he's glad he's found. She's his Shapoopy, 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 Shapoopy.
and it is just such a great like classic musical, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
Obviously it's not as profound because it's not trying to be, and it still does have a profundity to it. It is a great con man story. It is a fun, endearing romance. It's not my favorite angle of the romance, and I also think it's because he looks like her father, but I've always said he looks a little old for the role. But I'm not being ageist, but
Yeah.
in terms of the relationship, she just always reads younger and he reads older for those roles.
Yes.
They actually just did it on Broadway. Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster did it as Harold Hill and Marion, and now they're dating. So it brings you together, the Music Man. So it's just very charming, and it's hard to like find little flaws just because it is just a vibe. It's a fun time, and I think
Yeah.
that's all a musical like this, especially one that's about kids, for kids. All it has to be. And the last thing I'll say is that my favorite Letterboxd review comes from Iowa Debris, who just writes, Amaryllis is a bitch. That is her Letterboxd review right there. So I just wanted to shout that out because she makes fun of his lisp, and it's sad, but
iconic review. I can't help but say I agree with that reviewer
Yeah.
for most of the movie. I kept being like at the first time she laughs, I'm just like, who is this? Like I felt like going like stepping through that screen. But I definitely have a lot of things that I really enjoyed about this movie. I think if I had to pick 3, I would start actually with first what you were a part of, Dylan. The Barbershop Quartet is,
Buffalo
I
Bills,
think,
baby.
my favorite part of this movie, and consistently just the vibe that they exude is just it's difficult. It's like the closest thing to like having like chills, but like every single time they sung, just beautiful. It was funny seeing them move like in sync with each other. Even like the first song they do where he has to like lower him down, and it's just it's just incredible, and it's
Especially
one of the best parts.
coming off of the line of, oh, you're not going to get them to sing together. They can't stand each other. And then they're like, "Bah!" and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, it's just a great comedic beat. It is.
Yeah,
It's another great joke.
It's
Yeah.
so good. I think my other two
hate each
favorite
other.
parts, even though like there's a lot of other things I like, is the beginning of this movie is so good. Like it's just what a great introduction to a character. Like I think it's just the classic of like, you have the voices like matching the rhythm of the train, and when the train speeds up, the song speeds up. When it slows down, the song slows down. It's just such a in a music theory way, it's just so satisfying to watch. Like, and it almost made me want to see it on Broadway because I'm just like the technique of that is incredible. But to have them all talking about him, you're getting all this exposition in a fun way. You're learning about who will be later the villain, and then you see Hank Hill just like at the very end, he's just like, "Bye, everybody!" Like he
And it's
hops
written
off
on his
and
briefcase. Yeah.
yeah, he shows it and then he hops off and you're just like, man, I'm ready to go. Like I'm all ready to follow this character's like story. It's just great stuff. A great way to show and not tell through telling, if that makes any sense. It's a reverse way about it. But I think the last thing I really love is the billiard song. I think the billiard song is probably my favorite song out of all of them, just because it is something that still ages so well. It's at its core about fear mongering and politicking. Definitely accurate and definitely relevant today. But watching it, I couldn't help but just feel like it was just a perfect satire. And it shows. I think that's where I think Dylan, you were talking about depth about this movie, but like there is a lot of depth in this movie, and it's in moments where like that where you're like, man, Music Man's trying to say something pretty big about like social dynamics. I think the thing, and I'm going to kind of second what you said, Chad, about the thing that did not age as well for me, and the only thing that made it more difficult for me to watch is specifically the relationship. And Dylan, you mentioned this too, actually. The relationship is, I think, probably the weakest link in this movie, but it's not necessarily because of the librarian. She's a great character. I love her. I love following her. I love her. Her voice is incredible. But like he's kind of a stalker for most of this movie. He follows her home multiple times. He doesn't take no. He continues to cut her off. He comes to her work and then basically gets a bunch of other men to like pressure her.
And doesn't whisper in the library?
And doesn't whisper. It's like, it was like Hen and I kept having to pause during those moments. Those were the most that we paused for. And we kept being like, is the music man kind of a bad guy? Like he seems pretty bad. Like I'm not like he's supposed to be good now, but he's still stalking her. Like I don't know about now. He's talking to her mom. Like it's just like if you just look at everything like just an objective and you remove the musical aspect of it, everybody would be like the creep. Like what a creep. And he's rewarded in the end by getting her and then having a beautiful, almost fantasy-like sequence in the ending. Which also, I don't know if I'm so curious to see what y'all think about this ending, because I go back and forth on it all the time, because it just logically it does not make any sense. It makes sense emotionally, but like logically, why are the kids in? I guess the kids change uniforms, but even if we remove the fantasy aspect, how did they get the uniforms? And he's surprised at them arriving, and they arrive so quickly. Did the librarian set this up?
Yeah, I've never understood that. Also, because like, isn't his whole plan is like get them to pay for the uniforms, ditch town, take their money,
and
but
they
then
have
like,
the instruments too,
right? And then it's like, oh, but he comes around and gets, but he doesn't know about the instruments. So like, who actually gave them the instruments and uniforms? That's a good point. I really don't know, and it could just be one of those like this would be after the curtain call, so it's more for the audience. Like, oh, let's all dress up in costumes and do this big band number. But in the context of the movie, everything we've seen up to that point, you're right. It doesn't make a ton of sense. Like a lot of the resolutions of this thing are a little too neat. Like it's almost like and the one kind of ending before the ending of them finally falling in love, she's confessing her love to him on the bridge. one of the weirdest choices that makes the stalking part even weirder is that in the musical it's a duet. He sings with her, but in this version she sings to him, and he's standing there smiling
Whoa.
at her, and she's like, "There were bells on the hill, and I never heard them ringing. I never heard them at all till with the hill there was you." And he's just like smiling at her.
I never heard it singing.
And in the show, he's singing back to her, so it's like this kind of marriage in a sense, not literal, but like, you know, they're
Yeah.
both falling for each other because I think a lot of the stalking is because he has a plan more so than he actually wants to pursue her. It's more like, I need her to be on board with this thing because she's going to be the person who pushes back and ruins my plan because she's the stick in the mud. But they also don't make her enough of a stick in the mud. She's endearing enough to where that doesn't also work. But
Yeah, I did not know that about the duet. That's fascinating,
yeah.
actually.
Yeah, and I think
Wow.
that's also why they cast Hugh Jackman, because it's like impossible to hate him. So when he even is doing all this stuff, it's like, oh, he's trying to woo her in the library. How shucks.
Yeah.
Whereas here, it's like, this guy's like 30 years older than her. Like, get away. No, but it's yeah, that's all good points. Chad, what do you think of the ending?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much I think the same thing you guys were talking about. Like, I don't know, I think like the musical might have even tricked me where like, you know, I didn't, because it's my first time watching it, so I just didn't see a lot of like the nuances of like, you know, oh, he's still being creepy even towards the end, and you
Mhm.
know, all of this doesn't make sense at the end and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of weird. Like, there's one point where they started like marching, and then just, you know, clothes would just appear on them and stuff like that, like magically. So I'm just like, it's you know, like, I don't know, like musical logic or whatever. Like, it's not like fully
Yeah.
supposed to make 100% sense. But that, you know, I love the lens that Charles watched it from too, as far as like, you know, him kind of being a little bit of a creep, and you know, maybe that might have been like kind of like writing at the time too, as like
Mhm.
people didn't think about things in like modern day lenses, where now we're like, you know, well, that's toxic behavior and stuff like that. Back then it was just kind of like how people behaved maybe. But you know, so it's definitely like a good lens to look at. But I did remember, like, you know, specifically when you were talking about like the part where you know, he's sitting there like telling the parents like, oh, the pool table's gonna, you know, really ruin your kids, and they're gonna get into the wrong stuff, and he's like,
Yeah.
they got to get into the right stuff. And I turned into Pink Floyd at one point. I was like, hey, teacher, leave these kids alone, kind of a deal. So see, that was my joke. But no, but there was that, and there was one other thing that I'm now forgetting. But I did like that stuff you guys were saying. I can't remember what I was gonna say.
Maybe I'll talk about one other thing I was going to bring up, and maybe it'll come back to you, Chad. If it does, just
Maybe.
let me know. But the Amaryllis is a bitch. It's a funny review, and it's also Io Debris, which is funny because like this was before she was famous. She was just letterboxing. But I do think it is valid, and I think
Oh,
this is kind
that's
of what
so cool.
yeah,
I
this is
didn't
kind of
know
what I
it
was
was there.
going back to with Chad earlier with about the Native American things, because it's like I think we're purposely supposed to find them off-putting because like the barbershop quartet, they're the perfect example. They hate each other and they're able to find harmony. You know, Amaryllis is such a brat to Winthrop. Everyone makes fun of him. His mom's very strict on him, or his grandmother, I guess, because
Mhm.
I guess she's his sister, but really his
The
mom. I don't know.
family dynamics are confusing.
Yeah, and I think in the play it's a little bit more, or the musical it's a little bit more fleshed out, but I don't really know. But I also think, yeah, just like we're supposed to think they're off-putting to a sense, like that whole IOA song where it's like, you know, we're selfish and we're Iowans. It's like I think it's meant to set the scene to where this other selfish guy, it's like they all kind of make each other better people. But I think the Iowans change more than Harold does. But I guess it's like
Yes.
Harold does understand the importance of, you know, not ditching the people who you love. But I don't know. But up till the very last minute, he is still like, what time's the car, Marcellus? So I also thought it was weird that Marcellus was just in the town. Like, did they coordinate both being in the same town? He just happens to run into him. He's like, oh, my con man friend. Like, he's just like, yeah, I work here now. I sell rigs.
Hey,
Okay. All right.
gabagool.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, but that's the fun of it all too. It's like it's
Yeah.
a musical, so it can be, you know.
Adds to the comedy, I guess, a little bit of
Yeah,
it.
I guess. Chad, did the thought come back to you or no?
I think I covered everything.
Gotcha. Charles, any other thoughts on Music Man?
No, I think we covered a lot. I think we did a good job of being respectful to like honestly like what an achievement the Music Man is and still is today. I mean, I do think a lot of, I'm not a Broadway expert, but I do think a lot of the most popular like Broadway plays, or sometimes like made even more important because they had great movie adaptations. And I do think this movie plays a role in the musical getting a wider basis. And now, honestly, I feel like the only thing that this is missing is, you're right, Dylan, Hugh Jackman, because I do legitimately think if a younger actor was in this, some of the things I didn't like could have come off a lot better.
Right.
Didn't Matthew Broderick do it at one point?
He might have done it in the revival. Yeah, I'm trying to look right now.
He would have
at
been
some
interesting to see too,
famous
actually.
famous
Yeah.
productions, because I'm on the musicals Wikipedia. I'm trying to see if there's so Robert Preston, Hugh Jackman. I'm not finding Matthew Broderick. Van Johnson played him.
What am I thinking of?
Maybe
Yeah.
the producers, but
Yeah,
I know
maybe
he's
the
in that.
producers, but I
Yeah.
thought he was in something else. But
I'm
I
not
don't
sure. But yeah, Robert Preston was the original Harold Hill on Broadway, so it makes sense why they made him. It's kind of like the Barbra Streisand thing. It's like, you're
Yeah.
Harold Hill, so you're going to get to play him in the movie. It's the Ben Platt thing with Evan Hansen too. It's just like, it is your role. You made it famous.
Doesn't always work.
It
but-
doesn't always work, and in both
Yeah.
senses, they're a little too old for the role, but it's okay, because they're the ones that made it iconic. So, the Music Man, the Music Man, nominated for 6 Academy Awards, wins 1 for Best Adapted Score. Actually, I think Chad and I were talking off air about Wicked Part 1, where we were talking about, like, let's bring back the adapted score category, because now there's so many musicals now that we can
that's a
bring that
very
back.
good point.
And Dune as well. The controversy is it an adapted score? Is it an original score? There's a lot of borrowed music from the first one. So there was an adapted score category, and Music Man won it. It also was nominated for Best Picture, Sound, Art Direction, Color, Costume Design, Color, Film Editing. But in A Year with Lawrence of Arabia, it's very hard to win those. So yeah, Chad.
Just going to interject. I was correct. There was a television film in 2003. Matthew Broderick was Harold Hill in The Music Man.
I would
Kristen
love.
Chenoweth was in that one too. She was
Oh.
Marion. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I need to watch that, actually, because that would be perfect.
Yeah, and you want to know who played the mayor's wife? Molly Shannon, which is awesome.
Whoa!
Yeah. I now that you say that, Chad, I'm like, oh my gosh, I remember. Yeah, Victor
She's a
Garber
great
was the
pick for that.
mayor.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, what a good. I love that. Yeah. I was gonna make a funny segue. I was gonna say, speaking of shitty, creepy guys, let's talk about Marlon Brando. But I don't want to be too harsh. But let's talk about the film that sank Marlon Brando's career, or sank his ship, if you will, for at least a little while. Let's talk about Mutiny on the Bounty.
I was like,
I feel bad. I love Marlon Brando, but I will say,
I was like, Dylan, he may or may not actually be really good in this one.
Listen, talent aside, person aside, that was going to be my segue.
I hear you.
Like, this is one of the better ones. Well, anyway,
art from artist, kind of a thing. Mutiny on the Bounty, directed by Louis Milestone, written by Charles Lederer. Yeah. Cinematographer by Robert L. Surtees. Music by Bronislaw Kaper. Starring Marlon Brando, Trevor Howard, Richard Harris, Hugh Griffith, Richard Hayden, Tarita, Percy Herbert, Duncan Lamont, Gordon Jackson, Chips Rafferty, and Noel Purcell. Synopsis. A mutiny takes place on a ship called the Bounty when the captain becomes tyrannical and causes harm to seamen. Based on the 1932 novel Mutiny on the Bounty by Charles Norhoff and James Norman Hall.
I was going to say, I'm glad you added that second half, because I thought you were just going to say synopsis. It's about a mutiny on a ship called the Bounty. I was like, thank you for that, Chad.
You're welcome.
But I mean, that is what it is.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the mutiny, I feel like, happens very late in it. Anyway, another
Very
3
late,
hour,
yeah.
another 3 hour film.
Hannah came by. I was like 2 hours in, and she was just like, how's the movie going? I'm like, I'm enjoying it, but the mutiny has still not occurred. I'm waiting for the mutiny.
Yeah, there's no mutiny. Yeah, very funny. I'm going to start with this one just because the segue I made, I want to clarify, because this was the famous movie that sunk Marlon Brando's career. This is the one where kind of he was such a pain on set that they basically like blacklisted him and were like, you can't work anymore. And then he got The Godfather and things changed. But for 10 years, he was basically out of work because he was so difficult to work with on this set. And a lot of people were like, it aids in the film because you can see the frustration the other characters have with him. And I'm like, but he's supposed to be the one we're rooting for. The other guy's the mean one. The other guy's the villain. But I just think that was very interesting. Like, this is, clearly a problematic production of it. But as Chad said, separating art from artists, you wouldn't really be able to tell, because I think as a production, it is very well produced, is very well put together. This is, I believe, the first film ever filmed on Ultra Panavision 70 widescreen. So like, it just looks stunning. It clearly has an ambition to it. The cinematography, the sets, just so many gorgeous set pieces, and the storm sequence, and even at the end with the fire, the stuff on the island is gorgeous. Like, it is just a really good looking classic Hollywood Technicolor marvel. So I wanted to first and foremost open with that, because with Lawrence of Arabia, it's hard for anything to look as good in comparison, but I do think they did a good job making this as bold and beautiful as it is. I think it's interesting because normally when Chad and I cover best picture remakes, we've seen the other one first. Like West Side Story, we covered the original first. Color Purple didn't get nominated, but we watched the original first. Here I haven't seen the one that won best picture in the 30s, so I had nothing to compare it to. So this is the remake of that, but it is kind of a remake of it's a adaptation of the book, not a direct remake of the film. But I'm very interested now, when we get to that year, talking about the one that won, why that one won, this one didn't. I mean, also Lawrence of Arabia, but like, I'm wondering, like, is this one better, worse in comparison? Because I have nothing to compare it to. But yeah, very, very interesting movie. Surprised you didn't pronounce his name Albus Dumbledore, Chad, when you mentioned Richard Harris in the credits. That was my first thought. It's like, oh gosh, we're in for a treat here. But yeah, what do we think, gents, about Mutiny on the Bounty?
I started it going like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this one, because I'm sort of, maybe if you've seen the episode where our good friend Matt Chapman was on, where we covered Sayonara. He was basically saying he wasn't sure if Marlon Brando is actually a good actor, just full stop. And when he said that, I was like, I don't know if I'd go that far, but I didn't like his performance that much in Sayonara. And so when I was going on to this, I was like, I know, like, just like Apocalypse Now and The Godfather. Like, that was all I knew about it. And then Sayonara was like, well, maybe I won't like his performances before The Godfather.
Yeah, his like leading man era, before he was the character actor. Yeah.
And so when he showed up, he was like doing that accent and stuff. And I was just like, I don't know about that. I think I'm going to hate him in this too. And I don't think I'm going to like this movie that much. I wasn't like prejudging it, but I just wasn't getting great vibes from the start. But then I slowly started to really get into it. It took me, like you guys were saying, after the Tahiti stuff, where the mutiny actually starts to take place. But I actually really love the build up to the mutiny. I think like you really need that to show just how much of a bastard this Brighton guy is, and just how he's making so many terrible choices to get his own ends. And let's not forget, like we know exactly what this mission is to get fruit to feed the slaves. So it's already a pretty kind of problematic plot just in general. But like when you extract it from that and you just look at what's happening to these men on the ship, and you just see how corrupt leadership can be, and how because like this dude gets pardoned basically. They're like, well, maybe you shouldn't have been on that ship, but he gets a pardon. Like he doesn't get justice. And I feel like that's kind of like a lot of military stuff, where people at the top who make really terrible decisions that actually cost lives, a lot of the times they can just get a loophole or something will just get them out of trouble, and it's just whatever. And he's like, you're gonna go down for this, right? When Marlon Brando actually decides to take over the ship, and you're like, finally, okay. But you see just how like big of a decision it actually is to do it. If they would have did it in the first hour, that would have maybe not have been as credible of a thing to do. You'd be like, well, you guys are rushing into this mutiny. And then with that, I really love the arc of this character, Marlon Brando's character in the movie, and to combat the thing, but he doesn't even win at the end of the day and stuff. So it shows just how like complex and difficult. It's kind of like Lawrence of Arabia in that way, where it's not like a necessarily like satisfying ending. It's kind of a frustrating one, too, And also, I thought it was kind of interesting that he handpicked the Tahitian woman that played his love interest in the movie, and then he married her in real life.
Yep.
I'm about to say something that's going to get even weirder, Chad. I was going to say the same thing. I was like, it's honestly interesting because Sayonara is kind of similar. It's like this guy going into like this other culture and being so like in love with the culture that he marries this woman. He married the actress, as you said, Tarita, who played the love interest in this. But you know who he divorced to marry this woman was the love interest of the 1935 Mutiny of the Bounty. He married the actress Movita Castaneda from the original Mutiny on the Bounty and left her for the new woman who played it. It's a very Vertigo.
That's wild.
Very weird. And again, like this was a huge ego trip for Marlon Brando. Like apparently on set, it was just so frustrating to work with him that like I could see that being a thing where he's like, new eye candy, you're the same role, you're the same woman, you're just younger and more beautiful. Like it just it all clicks in my head. But it's also separating art.
You hear all the stories of him in like Apocalypse Now, like delaying that even further and stuff like that. So it's like a whole thing with him.
Yeah, he's a tough guy to work with, but good actor. I mean, I think he's a good actor. I know there's controversy on Picture This.
He has his moments.
He has his moments.
I said, I liked him in this movie. I didn't think I would, but then he slowly started to win me over, and I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. What do you think, Charles? Marlon Brando, and then, of course, the film in general, of course.
Yeah, I guess to start with Marlon Brando, I would probably fall into the more negative category in that, like, even when he's good, the way he does it is just lame. Like, even, like, he's great. He's great in The Godfather, but the respect for his talent just goes away immediately when I see that picture on behind the scenes of the guy that plays the lawyer. He's great. And it just strapped on to his chest are all the lines that he's supposed to say. And I'm like, man, like, isn't that the golden rule of acting is that you remember your lines, and he can't even do that. Yeah. Like at a certain point, it just feels like mostly honestly just like luck. And he's good in The Godfather, but I can't even respect his methods because
that's a good point. I didn't even know that.
They're just awful. Like
I think it's kind of a thing where a lot of like older actors who kind of feel like they've earned it, they will often like hide their lines everywhere, and they'll just go, I don't need to.
Al Pacino did it when he was on Broadway in China Doll. He had every piece of furniture he taped his lines to. My only rebuttal there is like he is a screen actor who has to learn a scene a day and then throw out the script and never have to think about it. Whereas theater, you're memorizing a whole 2-hour piece. And at that age, I understood. But also like you've done the show enough, you should memorize it. And another thing that's so funny is like The Godfather. We all know Marlon Brando's monologue in The Godfather. He couldn't memorize it. Like society knows every line of The Godfather at this point. That like you would think he would be able to learn it on set. It's like we all know, make him an offer he can't refuse. Like we know all those lines. Like he doesn't.
Yeah,
I have something that's slightly related, just on the learning lines thing, but it's fascinating. It has like almost nothing to do with what we're talking about now. But the whole, if you've seen it, A Real Pain, with Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin, Jesse was basically talking about how Kieran will like look at a script once,
photograph,
and then he'll go, "Got it."
It is a really tough thing, especially because like with rewrites and we see this with sitcoms. I thought you were going to bring up Friends because there's a great story where Matt LeBlanc erased all of Courtney Cox's lines because she would write, because they got rewrites every day, so it was like impossible to memorize. So sometimes they would hide their lines and stuff. She wrote them down on the table, like a few of her lines, and Matt LeBlanc erased them right before the take, like stuff like that. Where it's like I get it, like it's tough, but it's also like, I don't know. You're the best. You're supposed to be the best. Like you would think.
Yeah, it's just when I think of Marlon Brando, I think I can just think of a ton of other actors that are just as good at the same style of acting that he does, if not better, that were even existing back then. So it's just, I don't know. I think Marlon Brando is fine in this movie. I think the things I liked about this were not really more about Marlon Brando, but more so like the technical aspects of this movie. I actually was gripped by it like right away. So it was interesting to see, Chad, that
Mm.
you didn't get gripped until later. I can understand that too, because about the middle of the movie started to lose me a little bit more. As
When they
soon
get to
as
the
It
island.
was it
when
like
they
in
when they get
Tahiti?
to
Yeah.
Tahiti, like at first when they arrive, like the way everything is shot with the boats coming and just it's incredible. And then Hati Hati, his entrance is just epic. It reminded me a lot of the buildup in Last of the Mohicans when they're being captured and taken down to the
Mhm.
tribal elder to be judged. It reminded me of that in a lot of ways, and seeing the shift in power between Captain Blythe, who was a dictator on the ship, to now having to respect the wishes of someone he looks at as like weaker. It was just that was really cool. But then the island sequence wasn't really about the politics, and it wasn't really about the interesting identity. It was about men being men, and just in general just being uncomfortable around women and
Yeah.
people of color. It just
Mhm.
Tahiti is just it's a difficult part of this movie. I think there are like two sequences that are really beautiful. I think it's when they first arrive, and then the fishing sequence is just awesome. I would love to know the behind the scenes of how they shot that, because that's just
Mhm.
incredible. But I do feel like it's almost like this movie feels like three different movies in one. I actually agree with you, Chad, in that the buildup is needed. I actually felt like the first act of this movie was its strongest.
Hmm.
It was just the buildup was honestly incredible to watch these men go from disagreeing and fighting with each other at the beginning to then starting to be united in hatred against this guy. And I didn't know the true story, so as soon as Captain Blythe would do these awful things, I was just like, "Dang, like, really? You're gonna do that to your officer? Like,
Mhm.
these are rookie mistakes." And I kind of love this style of storytelling, or this genre. And there's like a ton of other movies about mutinies or like nautical crimes or things like that. And so I found myself seeing a lot of those movies in this too. Like, I really love this limited miniseries called The Terror, which was about the true story behind the HMS Terror that shot on Baltimore during Fort McHenry and then got itself lost in the Arctic, and was never seen until like a couple years later, when we discovered it. But it's just like that miniseries is incredible, and I feel like that miniseries deals with some of these leadership conflicts that arise on a ship like this, and mutinies, and keeping morale high. That stuff I was fascinated by, and I really do wish that the movie continued in that direction. But I feel like even in Act 3, when it gets to the mutiny, I feel like it becomes more of a character study in that moment of the main character. But I don't really care that much about the main character by that point. So
Right.
then I have trouble watching the rest of it. I cared about the ship and the men on it. But they just kind of disappear into the background after the mutiny. It's kind of
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Hmm.
Yeah, I also love the whole nautical subgenre. I mean, we covered a lot of them, Chad, on Picture This. I mean, Master and Commander was a big one that we were like, this
That's
is
probably the best
amazing.
Oh,
one.
that's
Yeah.
a great movie.
Freaking amazing. I just love that whole like idea of like, okay, we don't have to establish stakes because everyone knows you're on a ship in the middle of the ocean. That enough is the stakes. Like, you don't have to state it. It's just by nature of where you are, you're going to get so much drama out of it just because you know that a storm could come and you could all be fucked, you know.
Yeah.
And I do love that. We also covered a movie a few months ago called The Sand Pebbles that was very similar, and then a movie last
Mhm.
month called The Long Voyage Home that was also kind of like that, where it's just like looking at these people in their everyday life, their relationships on this kind of vessel. But I do think, yeah, like this is a great example. I think also because it just looks so good. Technically, I think it really utilizes all of that great kind of standard ship kind of swashbuckling but not really adventure type stories, because it's not about the adventure, it's more about the, like, you know, intrigue between characters, the more personal moments, yet it's in a scope of something a lot bigger, which I really like. So I'm just a sucker for movies like these, but I also know that, like, yeah, Marlon Brando's not the he's good in it, but like not the most interesting. So like the fact that they do, like you said, Charles, like focus so much on him in the last half, and as you both have said, once you get to Tahiti, like there's stuff about this that I think drags it down. But when it is like hitting its groove and cruising at that altitude that all those great movies do, like I'm really in it. So I was a big fan of this until I wasn't, So I think this
Mhm.
is
Same.
definitely a surprise because I didn't expect it to be great. Just because it's a remake of a film that won Best Picture, and I feel like those are always usually inferior. There are exceptions, like West Side Story is one I exampled that I like
Yeah.
quite better the remake, but there are movies that I think aren't quite as good, like All Quiet on the Western Front, which Chad brought up earlier. So I do think
Mhm.
it really just goes to show, you can't just count something out because it is a remake of a Best Picture winner, or even a Best Picture nominee. But I am excited when we finally get to 35 to watch the original and just, or not the original, because apparently they've made like 5 movies just about the bounty itself, but
Mhm.
two directly adapted from this book. So I'm very interested to see how that compares and what they change and what's different. Because technically, I don't think you can get better visually than this. But
Yeah, I bet the older one probably improved some of the things that I had trouble with, which was like the Tahiti section.
yeah,
I feel like back then that stuff probably is a lot more streamlined. So I can totally see how this story could be like Best Picture
yeah.
material.
And that one is Clark Gable is the Marlon Brando figure, and then the captain is Charles Lawton, who Chad and I both love from
Whoa.
Witness for the Prosecution. So that'll be
Right.
really interesting once we get to that.
I like how you brought up Master and Commander, because honestly, like all of these movies, I just compare to that, and then I'm like, well, it's not going to be as good as that movie,
Right.
Or like
It's not.
like that.
You're right.
It's kind of like the template of, Master and Commander did it kind of perfectly. Like, how does this measure up to that? It's kind of like the standard that I
Absolutely.
set. And I think this one came close, but like I totally get your guys' criticisms for sure. I think I did like this the most out of all 3 of us, I guess.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think sometimes, when like the story calls for like patience a lot of the times, like it's nowhere near like Lawrence of Arabia style, but like I think like specifically in the Tahiti section, like it needed to kind of be a little bit longer, because that was kind of the thing, is that he was making all of these people wait to like cover up his failures or whatever. So I think that added to the tension of a little bit, but I totally get like how it's like it's not the most like pleasant parts to watch either, and maybe not the most PC. I don't know how the word to say it. It's like
Mhm.
not the most culturally good parts or whatever. At that part, I also was kind of like, what is this? Is this racist? Like, what's going on with this movie right now? But I did like how it like kind of like came back together in the third act and got really interesting, and that's where I said that it kind of gripped me. And you had Marlon Brando, have to, come back, and like everybody's like, "Hey, we're having a party now on this boat. We kicked the bad guy out," and he's like,
Yeah.
"You're still gonna do what you're told." It's like,
Yeah, that was
this
actually
is-
great.
This is still the military. You're not gonna have a party right now. We got shit to do. Anyways, yeah, I was surprised by it, but
Yeah.
maybe not the best of the slate.
Yeah. Cool. Mutiny
Yeah.
on the Bounty. Any other thoughts on it, Charles?
I think the only thing I wanted to say is I definitely do. I will say this did surprise me as well, Chad, positively, in that I did overall enjoy this movie. But I think the thing that I really wanted to give a special shout out to is the soundtrack to this movie. I think is really wonderful. And I think the soundtrack honestly is better than a lot of this movie. And it does a lot of heavy lifting. Especially in the Tahiti sequence. The soundtrack for that is incredible. And honestly, I would put down so much money that when Hans Zimmer was doing the Thin Red Line soundtrack, he listened to this soundtrack and was just like, you know what, I need to capture the same vibe
I get
for
that.
for the tribes that what's his name is abandons ship to flee to, because it's honestly like the same concept: men avoiding duties, men avoiding violence, men avoiding war, and they're going searching for this safety in the hands of like basically uncolonized islands. Yeah, the soundtrack is just incredible though, and the heroic theme I think I talked about it with the Lawrence of Arabia, but this is another movie that just twists that theme over time, where it starts out like you see that first time the ship sets sail, and it's just so heroic and happy and joyful, and it's just incredible. And then by the end, they're playing that same theme, but it's bedraggled. There's less instruments. It's slower. It sounds more like a funeral march now. Um, it's really it's very appreciated, and I think soundtracks are sometimes I just enjoy kind of finding new ones, and so I feel like this is one I'll definitely come back to.
Nice.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, Mutiny on the Bounty, a surprise for all three of us. Didn't win any Oscars, but it is nominated for 7. Again, hard to win any tech Oscars in a year like this, but it is nominated for Best Picture, Best Original Music Score, Best Song for the love song "Follow Me," Best Art Direction, Color, Cinematography, Color, Film Editing, and Special Effects. And this movie, as we did say, did kill Marlon Brando's career for a little bit. But did it kill a
Thank you,
Mockingbird?
Mutiny on the Bounty.
Did it kill a Mockingbird? That's the question. Listen, the segues are harder and harder when you have to go from big ships to little small town stories about film book adaptations. And anyway, Chad, tell us about To Kill a Mockingbird. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
Oh, what a terrible thing it would be. To Kill a Mockingbird, directed by Robert Mulligan, written by Horton Foote, cinematography by Russell Harlan ASC, music by Elmer Bernstein, starring Gregory Peck, Mary Badham, Philip Alford, John Megna, Mania, Frank Overton, Rosemary Murphy, Ruth White, Brock Peters, Estelle Evans, Paul Fix, Colin Wilcox, and Robert Duvall. Synopsis: a Southern lawyer defends an African-American man charged with rape while teaching his kids about prejudice, based on the 1960 novel To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee.
There you go. I don't know if you guys saw it, but when we first see Robert Duvall, he's got all of Marlon Brando's lines written on his shirt. Okay.
He came straight from set.
Yeah, he came straight from set in his time machine 10 years in the future. All right. Charles, you're the resident English teacher here. Was this everyone's... This wasn't anyone's first watch.
Not my first watch.
Okay, so we'd all seen this one. We'd all probably read this one, I assume.
Mhm.
So
I have not, but I've seen the movie. I want to read it now, though.
Very cool. Okay, so Charles, as an English teacher, give us your first thoughts on To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts. I wrote like just a page about this movie alone, just because I've only seen it, I guess, 3 times is a lot, but I've read the book countless times, obviously because I'm an English teacher, but also because it's just one of those books that has been so canonized that it's almost almost everyone has read it. Watching this movie as an adult, though, was a strange experience in a lot of positive ways, and mostly positive ways, honestly. I still feel like, even though I knew where the story was going and I know the characters, I got wrapped into it right away. But I felt like when I was a kid, I put certain characters on pedestals, and like I felt like for instance, Atticus is a character that I feel like I can talk about for hours, and I feel like as a kid, he was my definition of what a good man should be, and he was someone that I strived to be like when I was a kid too, and it was actually for personal reasons just as much as movie. My grandfather, who passed away a few years ago, actually in 2012, he was a minister, not a lawyer, so very different jobs, but I honestly felt like my grandfather had the same mannerisms as Atticus. He never raised his voice. He was always talking about walking in someone else's shoes, being empathetic towards someone, understanding, listening. You know, someone would say the most out-of-pocket nonsense in a restaurant near him, and he would turn around and like talk to him like he was just like a friend, and basically being like, what's wrong with you? Like, I'm with my grandchildren, like, you know. And he just had this power to turn someone that was about to like throw fisticuffs with him into an ally, or at least someone that would leave him alone. And Atticus has that ability in this movie. And so for me, watching it now as an adult, I felt like just a deeper appreciation for the story and the character. but I also started to feel like I was looking at him through a more realistic lens, and I was actually seeing the more flawed person than I initially saw, and in good ways.
Mhm.
I really like that part of it. So for me, I have lots to talk about this movie, but it was really wonderful to revisit it as an adult.
Yeah. Atticus Finch ranking number 1 in the AFI's top 100 greatest heroes of the 20th century in film.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
even above Indiana Jones, Luke Skywalker, like he was the guy.
There you
Indiana
go.
Jones is number 2, James Bond is number 3, but Atticus Finch is number 1. This is clearly a guy and a character and a performance that has transcended not just literature but film as well, and I think for good reason. But I do agree with you in terms of the flawed aspect. There's one scene that I totally forgot about, which is when he shoots the dog, and I
Yep.
don't want to open on that, but as soon as I watched it, I was like, oh, Chad's gonna hate this movie, because that is a scene where I was like, fuck this, but I'm also like, why did they show this, and why is this being included? Is this just a sign of the times? And I still don't know the answer necessarily, but I haven't read the sequel book because I heard it kind of does take away a lot of the power.
Go
of his
Set a
character.
Watchman.
Yeah, have you read that yet, Charles, or no?
I have read it. I think, and I actually include that in my notes because I do think it was wild watching this movie after having read that, because I do think some of that book is in this movie.
Interesting. Okay.
But it's more, I think, hidden. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we'll talk about that in a sec. But Chad, I wanted to get your thoughts because you hadn't read the book, but you've seen the movie before. And we are, of course, big Gregory Peck fans. We gave Gentleman's Agreement our prize for Best Picture that year. So actually, I think Miracle on 34th Street won our Best Picture prize that year, but Gentleman's Agreement was our Best Actor choice for Gregory Peck, one of ours. What do you think of this one, To Kill a Mockingbird?
This movie is fantastic. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the dog part. That's definitely a part I saw coming, and I just went like, fast forward. But
Okay.
I can understand, like, because like that is the one big part of the movie that I'm just like, huh. It's like almost like when you watch. Oh, yeah, that's right. Dylan has seen Fargo. When you watch Fargo and you have that one scene in like the diner, and people go like, "Okay, that screenplay's perfect, but what about that one scene?"
Yes.
Or like,
Yes.
or like Singing in the Rain. What's that one big dance sequence that happens? Like, what? Where did that come from? Kind of a deal. I know.
I could
But I'm just
tell you
saying,
30 minutes long's worth of why it's great, but
I understand.
I agree with
understand.
you, Dylan. I agree with
And
you.
you could say the same thing about Fargo, is like why these things are actually important. And I'm sure someone could say the same thing about the dog. But I think that's what makes the movie really interesting, is you can dive deeper into it and kind of wonder about those things. And like, is it just because, he's like a Southern guy who still like, has guns and stuff like that. Like he's not like, this huge liberal guy that doesn't have gun. I don't know. Maybe it's a more of a modern lens to look at it. But
it's also the datedness of when it was written too, like, which I
Yeah.
always remind myself, like, that is just commonplace, I think, at the time, probably.
Yeah, everyone kind of had guns, and it's like, hey, when did you get your first gun? When I was 12. It's like, you gave a 12-year-old a gun?
You'll shoot
Like,
your
kind
eye
of
out.
kid?
Chad, the sad thing is you go to parts of the world today and that's still the case, sadly.
That is, yeah, you're right. But Charles and Dylan talking about Atticus Finch being just like one of these great characters, and I agree. I love what Charles was talking about, like relating it to his grandfather, and almost like that one part when the big racist guy comes up to him and it's like, are they
Yes.
about to fight? And then you're
Yeah.
like, no, Atticus would never fight. And then he just kind of gives him that long Paddington hard stare.
Yeah.
And then it's like he's gonna hard stare the racism out of people, and just sit there and like go like, what are you doing with your life? Like, why are you like messing with people that just want to be and just want to live, and you're just destroying lives for no reason right now just because of your effing hatred. And and I love that. I love the conversations he has with his kids about it, because you can watch it as a kid, and like Charles was saying, like, kind of watch it differently as an adult. So like, where you can get super angry about what happens to the black man that's on trial, and Tom Robinson, I think his name
Tom
is.
Robinson, yeah.
And that whole court case is just incredible. Just like
Yeah.
seeing like it kind of like reminds me of stuff like what is the case? Till, uh, uh, Emmett Till,
Emmett Till trial.
Yes.
stuff like that. It's kind of like a
Just a
very
few years after
similar,
Emmett Till as well.
yeah, a
Like,
very
crazy.
similar kind of thing. And it's just like all of these things about like whistling at white women, or just like going to help a white woman, and then all of a sudden your life is going to be over because you just
Hmm.
were at the wrong place at the wrong day, and people are, just selfish and just, hateful and just scared, and they don't want to get in trouble, and so they're just saying all these lies, and the lies get deeper and deeper, and then of course the entire white jury is going to convict him, even though Gregory Peck is like, he can't even use his left arm. Obviously, you can't convict this guy. These are all lies. And then
Yeah.
they're just like, we're white, so we're going. Of course, we're gonna, do the.
I
Go
found
ahead.
no, I found that element so interesting because we've talked about so many like courtroom dramas like on this show, but like 12 Angry Men, for example, or even one just came out in theaters, Juror Number 2, where it's like there's so many little things to look at in the case, and you look at it every which way, and you're not sure. You're the audience are wondering
Right.
what is right, what is wrong, and this one's so straightforward. It's like,
Yeah.
like this is interesting because it's a courtroom drama where there's no suspense in who is guilty and who's not, and I think
Yeah.
that's what's also so interesting about it is it's still as powerful a courtroom drama as any. But it doesn't have any of that suspense either in terms of like mystery and like you, the audience, wondering if he did it or not. Like I think it's very clear that he didn't.
Yeah.
But I think that's also why it is so fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. There's
and I think
yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think the performances really sell it. That's why,
Mhm.
because everyone's on their A game in this. Go ahead, Charles.
No, yeah, I agree with you about the performances, and there's so many things that I can say about Gregory Peck, but I'm glad that you brought up Emmett Till, Chad, because I was constantly thinking about Emmett Till during the trial, and Emmett Till is actually just starting to get taught in Baltimore City schools, and across the nation. Previously, was not. It was Emmett Till and his story wasn't part of the curriculum. Previously, people thought like the catalyst for the civil rights movement was Brown versus Board of Education. Now we actually look at Emmett Till as the trigger for the civil rights movement.
Oh yeah.
And so I honestly look at this movie as not showing change, but showing the start, showing the moment when change does start to happen. We don't get to see the change that happens. Luckily, the rest of the people back then, they got to live it for the next 6 years, basically, and even more now. But that movie, I feel like, captures the start of what it means to change your mindset and change how you look about other people. And if you haven't looked at pictures of the Emmett Till trial, you should definitely look at them, because I do feel like they modeled the courtroom drama based off of that trial, because they show the white men in the jury in the Emmett Till trial, and they're all like leaning forward on their knees like the jury is in this one, or they're going like this, or they're smoking and like rocking back. And then the father of the witness victim in this scenario is like sitting back, laughing, joking. And when you look at the shots of Emmett Till's trial, they're just sitting and joking and laughing their butts off. It's a really, unfortunately, infuriating, accurate depiction of that. Gregory Peck, though, I feel like the thing I really enjoyed about his performance that I got more out of it this time was during those trial sequences. I feel like he was extremely heroic, but I also felt like I started to notice that like there was a deep sadness in it, because like you said, Dylan, this is a very clear-cut case. Anyone, if you look at it logically, is very aware that he did not do it. And Gregory Peck is obviously aware of that context as well, and Atticus, the character himself. And so I feel like most of that closing argument, which is like the epic part of the movie, I feel like, is that he is basically someone that is, over time, as the closing argument goes on, he's starting to feel more doubt and almost even anger. He's not doubtful in Tom being innocent. He's starting to doubt humanity, though. I think he's starting to doubt, like, I'm sitting in a room of dozens, if not over 100 people that will absolutely refuse not to look and treat someone as less than. And I'm trying my best to do it, and they're still not going to give it to me. Like, I think he's aware that he lost, like, before he even sits down. because I feel like Gregory Peck shows that nuance. But I don't know, what did y'all think of him?
Yeah, I mean, just seeing that, like, you kind of see like he's still hopeful like the whole time because he knows where he is. He's not a fool. He knows that
Mhm.
the jury's probably going to do exactly what they did, but there's still hope because he knows that they can do an appeal and they can keep trying. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Curtis Flowers case. I think it's
Mm,
Curtis Flowers. It's like a whole thing where someone killed like a bunch of people in like a furniture store, and because he was around the area at that
oh,
time, they pegged him, as an African American man, kind of, the black man in a hoodie kind of a thing. Like, of course, that's probably the guy that did it, right? And so for decades and decades, this guy was in jail, and then they would keep having, the same, attorneys, prosecutors, getting doing all these weird things to rig juries and like make sure you get just to stack it with like a bunch of white people, so that of course it's probably going to rule in your favor if you're able to get the exact people that you want on that jury. So yeah, he wasn't a fool. He knew that with an all white jury, they're all gonna just like you said, laugh it off, don't care. He's a black guy. Let's just send him away or whatever, and we'll just believe the white people. And and then to see his like the devastation when Tom Robinson, uh, essentially like death by cop because he tried to run and stuff, and then to see him not only have to like reconcile this within his own brain, like we had a chance, we had a shot,
yeah.
and unfortunately he panicked and made a mistake, and I don't know, maybe we would have made the same choice in that situation, um and then have to go break the news to his family, and I
Mm.
just can't even imagine having to do something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what both of you have said about it all, and I do think the main thing is the fact that there's no mystery to the trial. I feel like in a lot of courtroom dramas, you get that moment where the lawyer second guesses, like, did he do it? Like, am I defending someone who did it, or vice versa? He's like, maybe they are innocent, but like also like in this case, it isn't that. So there's that extra added frustration where it's like, come on, we all know. Like, it's not even that you're trying to convince them that he did or didn't do it. I'm sure the jury even knows. It's just they want that that validation, that vindication. Like, I wonder if the jury even like knows that he's innocent, but just doesn't care, or if they truly are brainwashed into thinking he is truly guilty. Like, that part, I'm not sure, but like he does know that, and I think that's what's so frustrating. And we haven't even talked about it, but the kids in this film, also the fact that it is shown from their perspective, but also the fact that
Yes.
he has to also be a role model for them when this unrest is happening and trying to set an example. He has a lot on his shoulders, and I think that's another part too, is how do you balance being a father in the midst of all this turmoil that is really just centered around the small town, but means so much bigger in the grand sense of the world. I think that's also another thing too, is reckoning with that idea as well, of making sure you're setting generations up for success. And that's something that teachers do. It's the thing. It's, you want to give them the education, not just to give them the stone hard cold facts, but it's also like making sure the world's a better place than you left it. So yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to add on to what you were saying about like the trial and kind of like the jury even knowing, or the jury just wanting to be vindictive about it, and like they don't care about justice, they just care about getting what they want. And I think the moment that sealed his fate, Tom Robinson's fate, was when he said he felt sorry for her. And you can't say you're a black man feel sorry for a white woman. We can't have that. So
Mhm.
yeah, I feel like it just has like so many layers and stuff like that. But yeah, I love that you brought up about the kids, because that's exactly the best way to tell the story, because you get to see a lot like from their perspective, their kind of innocence of like what's going on with daddy's work. Let's see, who's that black man, and what's going on. And they're kids, they don't have any like hate for like someone else just because their color skin is different. But they do kind of have a little bit of their own prejudices with
Because that's
Boo
when it
Radley.
starts. That's when biases
Yeah.
start at a young age. Yeah.
Yeah, so they have like Boo Radley or whatever, who's like the kind of the like a boogeyman story a little bit, like don't go in that house, kind of a deal. Like we have all these stories until you actually meet the person, you find out they're Mockingbird, like they would never hurt anyone,
Yeah.
and it's just like all of these gossip rumors that have just been spread and spread, to someone, and you can see that with stereotypes on a whole race of people, and it's like and that can spread too. So, but I love how even when they have their own little prejudices, when they're actually confronted with it, they go, "Oh, he's not at all what I thought he was. He's just a guy who wants to help."
Right.
Even though I love when when she's like Scout, she's like, "Go ahead, Boo. You can go ahead and pet, or Arthur. You can go ahead and pet him." But she should pet him. But she's like, it's only because he's asleep. Because if he was awake, he wouldn't let you. I just thought that was great.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dylan, you're absolutely right when you talk about like the it all starts with the kids, and it's like it's not that people of our age or older can't change. I mean, sometimes the hatred is just so deeply rooted within a culture that it's just like you can't even like remove it. It almost takes an outsider, kind of like with Lawrence of Arabia when he had to kill that one guy because they were like so deeply rooted within their their rules of like society, and it's like kind of like Southern white people of that time especially would have like those prejudices that were so deeply rooted that you need to keep teaching things to the younger generation. I feel like sometimes the younger generation gets taught the worst things, and that's where and to bring it to today and bring it a little bit into politics, when people try to take like being LGBT and being trans out of like the books that kids are reading and stuff like that in today's schools, you can see that like people are already trying to gaslight an entire youth of what exists and what is correct, and trying to control that narrative to kids. I just think it's I'm sure Charles has a lot of thoughts on this that subject, but I think it's just so important to not be perfect but try your best to not only teach kids the right way to behave, but to get them asking questions and answer them to your best ability, and like have them engage with all of the stuff. And maybe I'm going on a tangent, but
no, it's a good tangent to go on. It is.
Thank
It
you.
is. Yeah, Charles, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm really glad, Dylan. I think you started us with bringing up the kids, and then Chad, you hit it right at the nail on the head with the metaphor with Boo Radley, because I know when this novel is taught in class, one of the biggest difficulties for kids is Boo Radley, because Boo Radley seems kind of like what you mentioned, Chad, earlier, like that Fargo dinner scene, where like that dinner scene doesn't feel like it matches with the rest of it, but it's there for a purpose. It's there basically because it shows how good she is at detecting lies. She's able to figure out that this guy is nothing. And in To Kill a Mockingbird, Boo Radley is a metaphor, but it's basically like the kids grappling with prejudice and race at the same time their dad is doing it on a more realistic scale. Like they basically believe all these stories told about Boo. They assume the worst in him. They interpret like silence from the house or even just a loud noise as like evil, which is just wild, but also like actually fairly realistic for how we kind of paint certain people. And it's only when they're attacked on Halloween that things shift. When they have closer experiences with Boo Radley, when they're able to realize that all of these things are stories. There's a real human being here. He's not, like you said, Chad. He's not like a criminal or evil person. He's a mockingbird. And it's always, I find the ending, it's, I think, divisive for a lot of people, but I actually find it kind of similar to movie that might seem wild, but No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
I got
uh, I like the ending because both of the endings are very abrupt. They seem like they kind of come out of nowhere. The attack seems like it kind of comes out of nowhere in a lot of ways. You don't even really know who was tried to attack them and who was killed until Atticus says it earlier. And if you weren't keeping up on the character names, you would even probably forget that it was her father that attacked them. It's like the attacker, even the racist in this moment when he actually attacks his family, even him, he's just in the background really for the ending. We're not going to really spend a lot of time on the racist. So let's spend time on Boo, the person that saved them. And I think that says a lot about the movie. I think my own the nuance that I wanted to talk about with Atticus that I felt like I picked up on this is dealing with the Go Set the Watchman controversy. Go Set a Watchman is like the sequel to this book. Highly recommend you read it just because it's really interesting. But it was kind of a first draft. So a lot of people don't necessarily consider it a true sequel because Harper Lee might have changed some things. But in Go Set a Watchman, it is an older scout thinking back, similar to this movie, thinking back to the events of this summer, these summers and the summers after, but she's now working as an adult, basically. She's trying to fight for equality in the 50s, basically. She's trying to carry on her father's legacy, but she's also starting to remember her father as not the best father. And I think that's actually where I wanted to talk about Atticus, because watching this movie, I think he is a great lawyer. I think he's a great leader. I think he's a great minister in a lot of ways, and he's a great hero, but I would not say he's a great father. And it's not because he's an awful human being. I think he's actually very relatable. And I think Atticus knows this, and he's struggling with it himself because it seems like physical kind of connection between him and his kids are rare, if at all. They don't even call him dad. They call him Atticus. Like his name, his identity as a person is almost more important than him as a father. They're mostly taken care of by a maid that kind of helps them out. And they're even raised by a neighbor. He's mostly not home. They are constantly put in danger. He's taking them either to places they probably shouldn't be going. You could argue that Atticus bringing them along constantly, or even not bringing them along other times, is the only reason why the racist father even knew where to look for them and where to find them at the end of the movie. But I sense this distance watching it this time, where Scout does love Atticus, but I do think that Scout wanted something more from him too. And it felt like Atticus in this movie realized how big and influential he was for the town, but that all of this energy he's putting to other places, he's not nearly putting the same amount of energy in at home with Scout and Jem. Even though I love Atticus dearly, and he is probably the person that I tried to aim to be the most when I was a kid, I do think that Jem was more of a father to Scout than Atticus was, because Jem was the one that was standing up for Scout. Jem was the one that was escorting her home and walking her to school. Jem was the one that was even cooking for her at times and taking care of her, and even making sure she didn't forget her clothes when she went out trick-or-treating. Jem is a protector for Scout. But it's also sad because Jem's a kid. He shouldn't have to be a father to another kid. So I found myself more feeling sad in a realistic way. It's not a complaint about the movie, but more rather like something more I'm getting out of it this time.
Yeah, and I love that perspective, because it is also like people just immediately think, oh, Atticus Finch, perfect human being, great father, great. But I love how you paint those things, because I think that's important to recognize. I don't even think they mention a mother in this case, or they might in the book of what happened to the mother. But I do think it's important to understand that and recognize single parent households, and just an overall commentary on this specific family dynamic and the way the kids interact with each other versus their parents, and also just in the midst of the career and the climate of the politics of the time. I think that's really fascinating, because I never once thought about it in that lens. But when you bring up all those things, I'm like, yeah, you're right. Those are all not great attributes. Yet we still look at him as a great guy. And I think that does show the nuance of the human being in a grand sense. So I think that's a really cool interpretation to take. And I did buy my mom that book, so she has it. So I got to go read it. But I'm really interested. Yeah.
Great book.
I also agree. I think that's a fantastic lens to look at it from. Like this isn't one I watch all the time, so I haven't really analyzed it, as much as Charles has, being the teacher who's like read the book and watched the movie from multiple lenses and stuff. And so to see it like from that lens is really fantastic. It's almost like the myth of the man is just different than the man himself.
Yeah.
It's like when you
Yes.
watch. We'll get to it one day. No, we already talked about that one. Selma,
Yeah.
with Martin Luther King Jr., where they show a little more of there's the myth about Martin Luther King Jr. He was a great man, but like also a flawed person as well, as all
Lincoln
humans
too.
are.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
exactly. So even though it's a fictional character, but still, you can really make these like complex characters, well, T. Lawrence is a real person, but like a lot of these, the character in the movie was very complex as well. But a couple other things I just wanted to bring up real quick is because Charles reminded me of the ending that I love with Boo going to sit on the bench, and then they're just sitting there talking about this whole thing, and how the sheriff is like, we all know the great tragedy like happened, and a man is dead for like no reason, and he's a mockingbird, like no reason, and yet that this is what's happened. So he gives Boo basically like a pass.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not even gonna do this. Like
He fell on his knife.
We'll get a win there. Basically, and then Scout gets to walk home with Boo, and I love that too, where Atticus is like he's maybe not the best father, but I do think at times he a little bit of that shines through, where he thanks Boo for his children. He's like, thank you, like I wouldn't have them if it wasn't for you. Something terrible would have happened to them. And then he lets her walk home with him. Like he's kind of a strange man, but he's proven himself to be this like genuine, like kind soul. And so I don't know. There's just a lot to the movie that I just think is really fantastic. And the other thing that I really wanted to note is when I was watching this with Carrie, the lawyer, I was like, how many times have you seen that? She'd never seen it before. And I was like, Carrie, you're a lawyer. They're supposed to have had seen this. What are you doing?
Required? Is that like a thing? Or just more like you should, yeah.
It's not required, but it's like one of those things like, where like every lawyer kind of like cites that as like their like Atticus Finch is like the model of like a great lawyer, like something that you could do. It's like Atticus Finch, and then it's my cousin Vinny is number 2. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, there you go.
He is a great lawyer though.
I love that.
Just a fantastic movie. I'm glad she finally got to watch it, and I think this might be her number 1. I'm not sure. I'd have to talk to her again about it.
Nice. Great. Any other thoughts on To Kill a Mockingbird? No? Cool. Chad, you're thinking. Anything else? First performance of Robert Duvall, notable.
Whoa,
right.
That was his first one?
Wow.
I believe so. I
That's
don't
so
quote me on that, but
cool.
I'm pretty sure.
And it's nonverbal
really
too.
cool.
He doesn't say anything, I don't think.
Yeah. After To Kill a Mockingbird. Yeah. That was his first his film debut.
That's
really
so
cool. Really cool. There you go. So To Kill a Mockingbird wins 3 awards out of the 8 it is nominated for. It wins Best Actor, of course, for Gregory Peck, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Art Direction, Black and White. It is also nominated for Picture, Director by Robert Mulligan, Direction by Robert Mulligan, I should say. Supporting Actress for Mary Badham, Musical Score, Original, and then Cinematography, Black and White as well. So pretty good day. Pretty good spreading of the wealth for awards that day too. The only one that didn't get any was Mutiny on the Bounty, but I feel like a lot of those awards were kind of covered by other films that kind of fit a similar vein. But yeah, Chad, it looked like you had some.
I just thought about this. I was watching the movie and I was like, wait, this character has, or this movie has a character named Dill.
It does.
I was
Yeah.
like, I was like, I wonder if this was little Dill when he was a
Maybe.
little kid running
I'll be
around.
honest. I auditioned. So there's a play version of this too, and actually they've redone. So there's two plays. There's like just a play version of it, and then there's a recently on Broadway they wrote a play. Aaron Sorkin wrote a play version of this.
Oh, wow.
So there's a
That's
lot of
cool. I
play
didn't know that.
iterations, and that one I think it might be touring or it just toured. But when I was a kid, I was like 8 or 9 years old, and my community theater downtown was doing this, and I auditioned for Dill, and I didn't get it, so I was salty. So
Dill's a great character
so
too.
I had a little bit of a vendetta against this film, well, it was a play at the time because I saw the play. So I actually saw the play, then I read the book in school, then I watched the movie. So that was the order in which I saw
Wow.
things. So I came around to it in high school when I read it, but up until then I was like, fuck this. But I am much more forgiving now. So what could have been. All right. Now we have to do the tough thing and rank these movies, which I think is a lot more difficult. Having now talked through all of them, I'm like, I could see a few of these being our top pick collectively, but
Yeah.
I had a ranking going in. I'm going to stick with that ranking, but my top two just interchanged all day for me. So we'll love to see how it goes here. But Charles, you are our
similar.
guest, so we do have to ask you first. What is your number 5 in your ranking here?
The Longest Day.
All right, I'll just put LD. Chad, I'm assuming I'm putting an LD for you as well.
Correct.
And me as well. So there we go. We're all in agreement. Let's see if we keep this going. Charles, what's your number 4?
Mutiny on the Bounty.
Chad, what is your number 4?
Mutiny on the Bounty.
We're going to keep it
Dang.
going, boys. That's my number 4 as well. So
Oh,
let's see. This could be a first. Because Chad and I have done this sometimes with the two of us, but I'm interested with 3 of us to see how it goes. Charles, what is your number 3? This is where we might do
oh
now.
no, I hope I don't break it. But my number 3 is The Music Man.
Chad, what is your number 3?
The Music Man.
Oh,
mine
dang.
is also The Music Man. So
Oh.
I think we all kind of assumed that this would probably end up being our top 2, but now comes the tough part because I genuinely don't know
Yeah.
where we fall on our number 1.
This
So
is
I'll ask you, Charles, first. What is your number 2?
I love both of these movies, but my number 2 is To Kill a Mockingbird.
All right, Chad, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is Lawrence of Arabia.
Dang, the streak.
I was gonna say
It was fun while it lasted.
It was fun while it lasted, but I already wrote it down. I am on Chad's wavelength as well. I did put Lawrence of Arabia at number 2.
Wow.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Charles, that means your number 1 is
Lawrence of Arabia.
Chad. Your number 1 is
To Kill a Mockingbird.
as is mine. Those top 2 are so tough.
It's
a great movie.
I thought Dylan was gonna put Lawrence of Arabia 1, so I'm kind of surprised, but I'm also not surprised because I'm like, I was on the same thing where I was like, between those two, which one do I put number 1? And
yeah, I think for me it was also like I was thinking about the artistry a lot, but then I was also thinking like To Kill a Mockingbird's still super thoughtful in its artwork and its design. Just the opening with the meticulous little trinkets and the clock, and I just think it's very artfully made. I think if it were a little bit more straightforward, it probably would have tipped the other way. But I felt like there was enough to justify it from a artistic sense as well.
Yeah,
and I feel like even though Lawrence of Arabia is like really important to cinema, I think like To Kill a Mockingbird is just really important to like life.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There, you bring up a very good point about the life aspect, Chad, because there are one thing I tried to think about watching this movie is that for a lot of kids growing up, this was probably their first experience. It sounds crazy, but their first experience with prejudice and empathy and racism, because it was a very unpopular thing back then to think about someone that looked different than you. And this movie still holds up very well. There's not really a lot of problematic things in it, and it's the shortest of all of these movies, but like it uses its time really well.
Right.
And honestly, like this movie's a great adaptation because I do think that there is, if someone was handed the reins to this movie, even with the same actors, I could totally see them messing it up because sometimes I think people are a little bit too pressured to change things about the book that are really important. And I can totally see someone removing Boo Radley from the movie just keeping it completely focused on Atticus and the trial. That would be interesting. But I think the kids in Boo Radley add this element of wholesomeness and optimism that the movie sorely needs, because
Yeah.
nothing else goes well for the characters.
That's a good point. Yeah, for me, it was also like Lawrence of Arabia has 0 women. It's actually, I looked at
Yes.
the stats. It is,
Yeah.
I believe, the only Best Picture winner with no female speaking roles. So I was also like, I just think
Wow.
that alone gives To Kill a Mockingbird a little bit more, because I feel like it is a little bit more universal. But in terms of the cinematic language, I do think we have to just give our kudos to Lawrence of Arabia as like this really solid runner up for us, because if we combine our totals, our Best Picture is going to be To Kill a Mockingbird for 1962 when we put in the Picture This Hall of Fame. But Lawrence of Arabia, just such a technical feat and such an achievement that, it really is a 2-horse race there. I think those two stand above. So I'm very happy that we covered this year and got to champion those films. But we do have to pick actors and actresses, our favorite of the slate, so it doesn't have to be of the nominees. Again, very difficult without Baby Jane and Miracle Worker amongst the slate for the women. We'll talk about it in a sec.
Yes.
But why don't we start with the actors? Charles, you are first for Best Actor. You selected to go first here. So who's going to be your pick? Who's your best actor of this 5-film slate?
Yeah, so like I'm sure y'all are going to get into this, but the actors in these movies are extremely impressive. There's some just heavy caliber ones. Even begrudgingly, there are some good actors in The Longest Day, but they're just kind of disappear into the ether, into the fog.
Right.
So it's hard to see them. But in these other movies, like the amount of just incredible, iconic actors that are just kill it. Peter O'Toole, well deserved. But I'm going to go outside of the box because I felt like, you know what, I got to have some hot takes. I'm picking as my person Omar Sharif as the best actor amongst them. He plays Sharif in Lawrence of Arabia. And for me, he was the element that put it above Mockingbird for me. And it's because I feel like he adds so much nuance. It's a big plus that he's not in brown face. He's actually an Egyptian actor. And so he fits, I feel like, the context a little bit more than some of the other actors in the movie. He has incredible chemistry with Peter O'Toole. Like, they bounce off each other so well that you forget that in the beginning of the movie, he was a villain and he shot his best friend. It's like, you have to you have to go back and you have to your brain has to process that, because over time, they become extremely close. But when they first met each other, he was even refusing water from him. That's how angry they were at each other. And it takes a special talent as an actor to go from someone that you hate at the beginning, someone that's a wall for the main character, to someone that he's the closest thing we have to an audience surrogate at the end. At the end, he's the only person making sense in the room. He's the only one that's fighting for something good and positive, which was the very same thing that he was fighting against at the beginning of the movie, which is just a credit to the actor and the writing. I think the biggest part of this that I really like about his performance is a lot has to be said about queerness in film. Queerness has been a part of film since the birth of film, but it's always been hidden and it's been in the subtext. I don't know if Omar Sharif has ever talked about this, or I don't know if Peter O'Toole has ever talked about this, but I do legitimately think this movie has a plot of queerness to it. And I think it's something that runs from the beginning all the way until the end of the movie. And Omar Sharif is a big part of this. It is actually, if you look into T.E. Lawrence's real life, people believe he was either asexual or he was queer. He never married. He had apparently some rumored relationships with some of the people he was in Arabia with. And I do think Omar Sharif is the stand-in for those characters and the stand-in for Peter O'Toole's his character's queerness as well. I wanted to pick Omar because I know O'Toole is just massive. And I also think if I don't pick him, one of you might pick him. So I think Peter O'Toole might be okay. But Omar Sharif, I was more worried about. And I do think something that I wanted to call attention to is that T.E. Lawrence, towards the end of the movie, like you said, Chad, he's tortured. But there's an element there. It's implied he's also SA'd as well. I think that's the term for it now because of YouTube. But in the book, it's pretty clearly textual because T.E. Lawrence says that he was SA'd in that moment by that. And then when he comes out, the safety and the comfort and the nurturing aspect that Omar gives to Lawrence when he comes out. He puts a blanket around him, holds him. You know, it's just, I feel like there is a love between the two men that it overcompasses friendship, and I do think it's romantic by the end of the movie. Even when I think Omar's last lines is the other guy basically like accusing him of being too close, and then Omar just says, "You don't know anything about our relationship," basically. I feel like that movie, whereas like you argue Mockingjay was extremely important for life, I think there is an element of this that could have been important for queer people, and
Yeah.
at least it is implied queerness in a Best Picture movie. And honestly, like each time I rewatch it, I'm going to be focused on that relationship because I am curious to see if it gets stronger over time or not. But honestly, props to Omar Sharif. I love that character and I love his portrayal. I know he was nominated, but I don't think he won, which is sad.
He was nominated, lost to Ed Begley for Sweet Bird of Youth, which I know nothing about, but
Yeah,
I like
me
Ed
neither.
Begley. But yeah,
Yeah.
great performance. A little bit of a curveball, but I like it because that's the beauty of this show is like we can highlight performances that aren't necessarily the norm because like they've already won their awards. You know, we can highlight the ones that maybe haven't gotten. You know, you think of that movie, you think of one performance, and it's usually not Omar Sharif's, but his is so good. So I love that you highlighted that. I love that pick. And I'm second, which makes it difficult because now I'm like, so what my whole thing was like, I figured there's like two obvious ones, and I figured Charles would pick
Yes.
one. I figured Chad would get the other, and I in the middle could pick like the fun pick. But if I pick the fun pick, then one of the two obvious are not getting on. So I would say what my fun pick would have been, because I'm going to go with one of the obvious, because I do think they both should be represented here. But Chad could also go wild for this. I was going to pick Buddy Hackett for the Music Man, just because he has such a fun comedic relief energy. Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm gonna get son of it. Yeah. But I ultimately, as much as this Chris Farley, John Belushi love and heart wants to, I will not, because I do think now I'm between the two. I'm gonna go with the person though who I think just for me has the best performance, and I think it's sad that the other person never won an Oscar, but I think when you look at who he lost to, it makes a lot of sense, and that's Gregory Peck. I'm gonna pick Gregory Peck. I think that monologue at the end is just so powerful, so just sincere, but also urgent at the same time. He has a power, he has an anger, but he has a softness and a relatability at once. So, I just love his performance. I think he's great in everything I've seen him in. But this one, this is the first time I was introduced to him in cinema as well. So it's what made me love him. So, I'm going to go Gregory Peck. I feel good with that. Which means Chad has the difficult task if he wants to go for the obvious or pick another more deep cut. Because there are a lot of good performances still out there.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Can you remind me, Dylan, has Peter O'Toole ever won? Because there's Goodbye, Mr. Chips.
The Oscar or
the Picture This award?
Okay, so
I don't care about the Oscar.
Okay, well, he has never won an Oscar, so that's that answer.
Right.
I'm gonna look. Lion in Winter. I believe we did not give him the award. I believe we gave it to Katharine Hepburn. I'm gonna check right now. What year was that? 1968. Yeah, it was Jack
66.
Wilde. No, 68 because you gave it to Anthony Hopkins for The Lion in Winter, not for Peter O'Toole.
Right.
So we have not awarded Peter O'Toole an award here. But that it
even
doesn't
in
necessarily
Goodbye, Mr. Chips,
is
that's a remake. That was the remake.
Oh, it's definitely the remake. No, because we gave it to Robert Donat for Goodbye, Mr. Chips, the original.
Now I am torn. Because
give it to your favorite performance. Jack.
Yeah, give it to your favorite.
I know. Yeah, I'm torn between two. All right, I'm gonna give it to Peter O'Toole.
Okay.
Because I agree that I think he should have a Picture This award.
Okay.
But I'll highlight the other name that I was thinking about because I'm so torn. And his performance in Lawrence of Arabia is the thing. I mean, I agree about Omar Sharif and that relationship. That's such a great thing you said, Charles, because I didn't really even pick up on a lot of the queer stuff, and I'm wondering if they had been able to hammer home a little bit more on that relationship if the movie would have been even better. But like even look like the subtext and stuff. I think it's a very interesting lens to look at the movie from. But just Peter O'Toole's performance and like him getting beaten down and slowly changing, he does have kind of that Walter White, Tony Soprano kind of like anti-hero kind of arc and stuff, where you see how divided people would be on his legacy and stuff, and you can see him pleading to these people like I killed people and I liked it, and stuff, and that kind of like made me gasp where I was like, whoa, this movie's getting interesting. And I think he just really sells it. Like a lot of the times when he's just like sitting there on the camel, just like doesn't even know what to say, like after like he lost that kid in the quicksand and he's just like saying nothing. You just got this look on his face and it's just like he's truly, and just even seeing him, what was it like just like 6 years later, The Lion in Winter, and he's like unrecognizable.
Yeah.
And it's just like, just what an actor. And he was like 32 or 36 or something when he did that role, and I was like, oh my god, he was younger.
He was born in 1932, so he was 30 when it came out, when Lawrence of Arabia came out.
He was younger than I am now.
Yeah, that's wild.
When he
actually
did that, and I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense to me. I'm like, I don't know. It's just one of those things.
Yeah, I think it's a great pick. I think it was right to pick him. Not that there was a right or wrong answer, but I do think he should be represented in R3. And I will say we do have one other opportunity to award him because he was nominated for Beckett in 1964. So we will eventually get to that movie. But his best performance in Ratatouille, unfortunately, Ratatouille is not nominated for Best Picture, so we won't be able to pick him for that. But he's the food critic.
He's in that. Oh my goodness!
I think that's his last role. Yeah.
Before we
killed
transition
it in
to actress, let me just quickly highlight the other actor. It was Brock Peters, Tom Robinson.
Nice.
I was like just enchanted by his
he's great.
Panicked, but also kind of like just telling it like it is, and like when they were like, tell us the truth, Tom, just like don't hide anything. You swore to tell us the truth. And, just like his hesitant, I can like talk a lot about that performance. I wish we could award 2.
Yeah. Honestly, I was going to see if you guys would go for it. I almost picked the Buffalo Bills as the best actor, all 4 of them, but I figured that was a little bit of a cheat.
I would support it. And Chad, I'm always talking about Star Trek, but guy that plays Tom Robinson, he's in Deep Space Nine, and he plays a super important character in that. And I found myself being like, man, now I totally get why I was drawn to him in Deep Space Nine, because you're right. Powerful. He has this, it's just this quality to him that you kind of get enchanted with him for a little bit. But
there you go. All right, so now we get to go to Best Actress, and Chad, you actually get to start us off here. I will say the pool is a little slimmer because one film just does not have women in it. So we're now looking at 4 films, and the camels, we don't know their genders, so we can't pick them. So there are 4 films eligible. So Chad, what are you going to pick for Best Actress?
Dude, when we were asking Charles what he wanted to go first on, I was like, please say actor, because I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do,
right?
If I have to go last on actress. So I'm glad I get to go first because I'm gonna pick sorry, I had this up, Mary Badham, Scout from To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, she's great.
I just think, I don't know, it's just really fun. Like her name's Scout, what you think would be kind of like a classic like little boy nickname, but she's got that. She's kind of like a tomboy herself, but and I think she's like a girl that like hates to wear girly stuff, but you have to see that. And I just I love how she portrays that character, and I just love how her curiosity and her fear, just everything like a kid would be like in that situation. Just kind of annoyed. She's mean. She like gets into fights sometimes. She's got like a lot of stuff going on, and I don't know. I love that that's kind of like our main focus for the story is Scout, and you get to see a lot of stuff from her lens. It's her like not her narration. It's someone narrating for her. I'm talking a lot about the character, but I think you really get to see a lot of this, prejudice like through her eyes, and it's just like the childlike curiosity. I just really think she, it's like as a young actress, like really like nailed that role, and
Yeah.
I don't think I would have enjoyed the movie as much if I wasn't looking at it through her eyes, and that
Yeah.
actress in particular. So
Yeah, it's a great pick, and it is the only woman nominated of these 5 films, so it makes a lot of sense that she is the one we pick. Yeah, it's tough. If we were to go for like old school, like we just pick out of the nominees, it'd be a lot easier because we got Anne
Yes.
Bancroft and Patty Duke for The Miracle Worker. We got Betty Davis for Baby Jane, Angela Lansbury, The Manchurian Candidate. So we had a field day, but we unfortunately are limited to these 5. I'm gonna go with the one that just of these performances feels the most full because it is the biggest role on the board. But I do think she's great. I think her chemistry with the lead actor isn't perfect, but I think she alone is good, and that's Shirley Jones for The Music Man. I think also her singing is so beautiful that it's like just that alone, I think could say that she's one of the 3 best of this slate. Again, it's slim pickings, but I think while there are performances that are maybe more memorable and a little bit larger in that one in terms of personality, I think she just really grounds the film in a nice way, which is ironic considering she's not the one who sells anvils, but she does keep it grounded. So I do love her in that film very much. So yeah, not a lot
and
to say
she
about
was
it, but it's good.
she was the other actress and the other person in Elmer Gantry.
Yes, she was Shirley Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did we give her the award for that? Probably not.
I don't remember, but she deserved it.
We did.
Yeah.
She joins the Hall of Fame. Look at that.
There
I
you
didn't
go.
even good catch, Chad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Shirley Jones is going to be in our Hall of I can't find her now. Yeah, there she is. Elmer Gantry. Chad gave her the award. She won the Oscar for Elmer Gantry, and now she's joining the Pictures Hall of Fame. I didn't even realize that. Good for her. And I think Gregory Peck joins it too because we gave it to him for Gentleman's Agreement. So 2 people joining the Hall of Fame today. That's awesome.
Nice.
Omar Sharif did not get it for Funny Girl, so he's only got 1 now, but still he's on the board.
Oh, was he the husband?
Yeah, in Funny Girl.
Oh.
So,
Oh.
yeah.
Okay.
So awesome. Cool. Well, now I'm really excited. I put Shirley Jones in the Hall of Fame. Didn't even realize it. All right, Charles, you have a tough task, but what do you
I do. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Shirley Jones too, because she's someone that definitely elevates the material she's given in The Music Man. I will echo what Chad said though, that it was difficult. I think I would even throw Mutiny on the Bounty into the category of like not giving women anything to do,
right?
Because it's just she's not given a lot to do, and she's not treated very well either. It's just not great. So it was even tougher. And The Longest Day too, there's no one in that. It's an absolute mess. It's what is it, the Bechdel effect or
Bechdel test?
Yeah.
Bechdel test? Bechdel is really
Even
upset
Scout
at these movies.
doesn't really pass that, does she?
No. If I had to pick one though, she was 3rd on my list, but I still think she's a great pick. Mary Badham, who plays Mayella, or sorry, not Mary Badham. Colin Wilcox Paxton, who plays Mayella. She plays basically the person that falsely accuses Tom Robinson.
She's fantastic. That's a great pick.
And she is given a really heavy task. She's basically someone who we initially think is the real villain of this movie. And then we have to realize that she's actually a victim in her own way. Yeah. Even though she's lying about being a victim, she's truly a victim in another way. It's like a very multi-layered character and performance. And she's only in the movie for about like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. But like you can feel like that she is trapped. You can feel like her life is in jeopardy and on trial as well. If she does not falsely accuse Tom of this, what is her father going to do to her? Atticus does say that she was severely beaten. Like that is evidence. Like that is true. They have evidence of that. And it's something that can kind of get swept under the rug because that's not really the focus of the trial. The focus is getting Tom exonerated as he should. But she's a victim in her own right. And I think Colin Wilcox Paxton gives a multi-layered performance that allows you to see the history that's implied, even though it's not outright stated. You can feel even at the end that it's not a new world for her when Tom is found guilty. She just goes back to the same old. She doesn't escape like Tom doesn't escape. So yeah, I really appreciate her performance in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Nice.
That's a great point. I actually almost picked her too. That I
Mhm.
was between Scout and her. So yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so we did end up finding 6 great actors. So let's do a quick recap. Our picks for best actors and actresses. Our best actor picks. Mine is Gregory Peck for To Kill a Mockingbird. Charles's is Omar Sharif for Lawrence of Arabia. Chad's is Peter O'Toole for Lawrence of Arabia. Our best actresses. Mine is Shirley Jones for The Music Man. Charles is Colin Wilcox Paxton's for To Kill a Mockingbird. Chad has Mary Badham for To Kill a Mockingbird. And our best picture for 1962, based on averages and consensus and math, is To Kill a Mockingbird. So there you go. 2 awards for Lawrence of Arabia. 4 awards for To Kill a Mockingbird, which I believe puts it high up there,
Yep.
close to I think Shakespeare in Love had our record for the most Picture This awards
Wow.
at 4, tied with. Okay, so now this joins it: The Godfather, Goodfellas, Shakespeare in Love, Virginia Woolf, and To Kill a Mockingbird, all with 4 Picture This
Nice.
awards. So very
Good
cool.
company.
Yeah, very, very cool. A good company there. And that is where we close the book on 1962. Any last thoughts before we tease the next month on 1962, Charles or Chad?
Just appreciated you having me on. I always love talking about movies and books and TV shows and stuff. And as I get older, the opportunities sometimes feel more rare. And I just enjoy getting to talk with you all about these movies and learning new things about the movies myself, especially all the behind the scenes information y'all were adding in. Were really shined a new light on a lot of these.
Awesome. Well, we were so happy to have you. Yeah, Chad.
I was just gonna say, and as usual, you like crushed it, like bringing
Yeah.
like so many detailed
thanks.
notes and great thoughts, and just really like multiple movies in the slate you like recontextualized for me, and I'm like, whoa, I
Yeah.
gotta rewatch this movie now.
Yeah, like I had picked up on the queerness in Lawrence of Arabia, but you really put it to words, and the stuff with
Yeah.
Atticus I knew was a thing in Go Set a Watchman, but I didn't even think about it in the context of this, and you definitely brought that. So yeah, I knew it was gonna be awesome just getting to hear you talk about these movies. So to actually now witness it and experience it was awesome. So thank you,
Thanks,
Charles,
y'all.
for doing this.
Yeah.
But we do have to tease next month, which is going to be our end of our year of classics. It's our grand finale here for Picture This, but it is the year 1945, because there is a holiday film in there, and we always try to keep something that's Christmas related in December, though I have not seen that film, so I don't know how Christmassy it is, but it is actually a sequel to another Best Picture winner going my way, and
Yeah.
that is Bells of St. Mary. So we'll be watching a sequel to a Best Picture winner. But the award nominees that year for 1945, we have Gene Kelly in Anchors Away, the film I just mentioned, The Bells of St. Mary's. The Best Picture winner, directed by our favorite here, Billy Wilder, The Lost Weekend. Also, noir. It is a little late for Noirvember at that point, but it is Mildred Pierce, one of the greatest noirs. And then, of course, the master of suspense, he's back. It is Spellbound by Alfred Hitchcock. So that is going to be
Wow.
our top 5 films
Cool.
of 1945 to discuss. We'll also talk about other 45 films and talk about the history right after the war there, and cap off this year of classics. I'll put up that beautiful graphic for 1945. There's Lawrence up in the top right there. But yeah, so we are going to be continuing on 45 next. But lastly, just got to ask some plugs, anywhere they can find you guys out there on the internet. Anything you guys want to plug? We'll start with you, Charles. Anything, anywhere they can find you, or
Nothing
anything to tell?
they can really find me except in other videos with Chad doing some rankings, which were a lot of fun. And so I might pop up in a few more of those in the future. But yeah, just you'll find me in Baltimore City teaching the kids.
Love that. And Chad, where can they find you? I'll put your socials up.
Yeah, for sure. You know, you see my letterbox down there. Check out Cinema Chat as my channel where Charles mentioned I do a lot of rankings. You ranking with me is the show. You know, franchises, directors, filmographies, all these kinds of things that we rank, and we have a lot of fun doing it. Charles has been on many episodes. Dylan has been on a lot of episodes. Always have a great time ranking stuff over there. Check out Welcome to Primetime is my horror channel that I have. Dylan has appeared on there, but I run that with my buddy Hunter Chambliss and my wife Carrie Webb. We have a lot of fun just talking horror. we've been doing a lot of series and stuff, like decades bracket series. We're trying to figure out what's the best horror movie of all time. And then we're just now finishing up our 61 days of prime time that has now become 3 months of prime time, basically, because we didn't have like enough time to finish all 61 in 2 months. But it's okay. We're finishing them up and having a lot of fun doing it. Also talking Buffy the Vampire Slayer, stuff like that. So yeah, check out that channel if you want to, if you're in a spooky mood. Is that all I have to plug? Yeah, no, it's normally I just plug this show, so
There you
that's
go.
it.
Yeah, and next month, of course, is the holidays, and this is being recorded the day before Thanksgiving and aired slightly, I think, the day after Thanksgiving. So we just want to say Happy Thanksgiving, and we are thankful, Chad and I can speak on both our behalves, of all of you for watching, listening, keeping up, engaging, interacting in the comments, wanting to be on the show. I mean, we didn't even think we would ever get guests on the show, let alone such great guests and guests who put their all into preparing for the show and actually wanting to be here and talk about the movies and really engaging in such great discussion. And I'm very grateful and thankful for Chad also for keeping me invested in this project and keeping me going even when the world tries to push me down and tells me to give up. I do this for all of you watching, but I also do it for him and for Matt and for Kelsey and for Zach and all the people who help me remind me why I do this and why I love doing this. And thank you all. And I hope you all have a very happy Thanksgiving and a very happy holidays, though we will see you before the end of the holidays. Chad and I will. And of course, happy Thanksgiving and holidays to you, Charles and Hannah. And of course, Chad, Carrie, and Elliot, and all the cats that we saw walking in and out of frames today as we bid 62 a farewell, 62, and we say hello soon to 45. But on behalf of Charles, Chad, and myself, you can find me on all the socials down there, Dylan Randazzo, or Dylan_Randazzo, Letterboxd, Twitter. I combined the two and I said Litterbox. That's funny. Dill Pickle Movie Network is where you can find us as well for the show and on Dill Pickle Podcast. Otherwise, thank you all so much. Have a good night. Happy holidays, and we'll see you very soon.